Now.
Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks for being here. Today on the big program, lots of things to get to, lots to talk about. Countdown to GOP convention next Monday. Gonna be the kickoff. We will be in Cleveland covering the big event. Should be entertaining, should be eye-opening, should be interesting. I'm really very curious to see what Republican Party shows up. Will this be the cavalcade of crazy that I think everyone is hoping for, or is this the moment where Republicans actually start coalescing around the idea that the Donald is their guy and really try and push towards his strengths and where he has been successful? Will we see the party move in that direction? Some of the platform stuff may say, kind of. So we'll get to some of those thoughts, but really looking forward to our trip to Cleveland. And then after that, our trip to Philadelphia for the DNC convention there in Philly. And to me, these conventions are, it's the pomp and the circumstance. It's all of the big party that it is, but out of it, the platform. What comes out of it? What is the positions of each of the parties, so that you can put them side by side and go yes or no. And right now, we're hearing lots of bits and drips and drabs and lots of stuff. I'm looking forward to the finishing of that, so that we can really discuss priorities. Aside from rhetoric, aside from all of the nonsense that we'll see and hear over the next several months, what are the real priorities? Thrilled looking at that. Good to be back. Had some throat problems. Haven't been able to talk for a while, so getting back into doing 3 hours, a little shaky. But I appreciate all the folks who emailed me going, "Hey, what's going on? How you feeling?" Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Good stuff. So let's get to it. Evidently, not going to be singing here in Pennsylvania, for at least. We're not going to be singing "All I Want for Christmas is a Budget." Not going to happen. Evidently, last night the governor came out and said, you know what, we're going to allow the budget as passed by the General Assembly. That's going to become law one way or another. That's going to happen. But he's not going to sign it unless, and this is where you go, smart move, I guess, at this point. You're not going to sign it unless they put some revenue into it. You've spent a lot of money. You've made some good priority decisions, although we can argue about how much we're spending on education, what that means to our priorities as a Commonwealth. There are some good things in the budget. I would argue education spending not quite enough, but hey, it's a step. There's a little bit more. It's a step. Now all they have to do is figure out how to pay for it. And this is what the governor is saying. Look, I'm going to let it go in the law. We're not going to have this long, drawn-out battle. It's an election year. Nobody on either side of the aisle wants that, especially the incumbents who are afraid that they're going to get whacked in November because of the budget. Nobody wants the long, long fight. So my concern about this is that, yes, we got some historic increases, as what they're calling it, historic increases in education spending. Not so sure about that, but that's what they're saying, historic education increase in spending. Doing some opioid things. We're going to start looking at making sure that people with opioid addictions get some help and some treatment to help combat and fight what they're now saying is an epidemic, and I agree. The whole thing with Prince to me was a lot of, and the same thing with Michael Jackson and a lot of the other ones. It's pain management. And we as a country got to figure out, how do we deal with pain and pain management? As someone who had a lot of friends who's gone through workers' comp and serious back injuries, they get you hooked on these painkillers, and then one day say, you're fine, no more for you. How do we deal with that? Also, there are some things in there that, there's an idea on, how do we provide critical services? How do we make sure that seniors and the most vulnerable are cared for? The governor claims there's some of that in it. So I'll take his word for it. The problem is you need a revenue bill. You need to pay for it. You need to make sure that it's sustainable. You need to make sure that it's sufficient to cover what you're spending. That, again, back to the whole kitchen table economic thing, that to me is important. Got to make sure we pay our bills. Now, it is an election year, so it'll be interesting to see if anything happens by midnight tonight, because the governor says by midnight tonight, that he'll sign it up until then. If there's a revenue bill, there's not. Trust me. Republicans are not going to raise revenue in an election year. It's never going to happen. And it may shock me by midnight they may do it, but I doubt it. It's just, as I'm looking at the political tea leaves, there's no way they're going to have a tax increase. And there are so many opportunities to find revenue that we've given away. I look at some of these economic development schemes. The first place for me to go is close the Delaware loophole and close a lot of these corporate loopholes that allow companies to come in and not pay taxes forever. In fact, I remember a couple years ago there was a piece of legislation that allowed a big company out in Allentown, and I'm not going to say which one, but allowed one of the big companies out in the Allentown area to come here to Pennsylvania from New Jersey, moved across the river, and got to keep the state income tax that their employees thought they were paying to the Commonwealth. And it was one of those moments where you go, why are we doing that? We're starving ourselves of resources. And that's what a lot of these corporate givebacks have been, starving us of resources that allow us to then go forward to fund education and things for seniors and things for our most vulnerable. Things like, the fight against opioid addiction. If you have those resources, it's easier. If you've got to go begging to corporate interest and to charity, not so much. And what's bothering me about this budget is I'm led to believe that, again, it's another Corbett era budget where we use a lot of smoke and mirrors, a lot of gimmicks, and it's not really a balanced budget. It's not really paid for, which leads me to go, come after the election, what does that leave us with? So as the next couple of days go by, we're going to try and reach out to some of the state reps and to the governor's office to kind of get a thought on what's that bringing us. Are we passing a budget just for the optics that, hey, we got our work done almost on time, so that everyone can go back and campaign for re-election? Or is this something that maybe it is paid for, and I'm just not seeing where the couch cushions have the money? Just kind of that thought. Now, do I think the governor is doing the right thing? I do. I think it's reasonable. I think it's rational. But in the end, if there isn't any additional money, we have some problems. We have, again, more of that structural gap that's not going to allow us to do things like invest in the future. And I think we've got some serious education problems. We've got some serious infrastructure problems. And if you want to create jobs, and we hear this all the time, we need to create jobs. The best way to do that is, one, have a really good education system, K through 12, higher ed, all of that stuff, have a really highly educated, highly skilled workforce. The other is infrastructure. Having the best roads, bridges, broadband access, having all of those things in place that businesses then can come and plug into. Not by handing them cash, not by giving them huge tax breaks and all of that stuff, because we have to know by now, and I think everyone knows by now, that the gimmicks that we've played, this beggar thy neighbor economic development, hasn't worked. And it was never going to work. This whole hostage situation of give us money or we'll leave, or hey, I'll give you a bunch of money if you come. and it doesn't seem to really work out for taxpayers. Over the weekend, I was reading Greg Leroy's book, The Great Job Scam, and he goes through just a ton of these scenarios where a company goes, "Hey, we're moving. We're going to be moving. You want to keep us? You're going to have to give us some money. We need tax breaks." And how they hire lobbyists and euphemistically named, public action, citizen group, grassroots groups, and how they hire these economists to come in and say basically anything they want, because the sky is evidently falling, and how really this goes back to the right wing's attack on government. You had government officials saying this is a bad idea, and nobody believing them. Because the corporate lobbyists, the corporate economists, all of the corporate money, and the one case I'm really in my mind is Raytheon in Massachusetts. They spent like $500,000 on lobbying and on this PR campaign, and they got something like $21 million out of it. Some just obscene rate of return that, again, you look at the budgets, that kind of money then comes from the bottom line. Because while you have savings for the company CEOs and the shareholders and the investors, it's great for them. It didn't help the taxpayers, and it certainly didn't help the workers. So this idea that it's jobs by tax breaks is nonsense. So to me, it's that let's tax them. Let's invest, give them the best infrastructure, give businesses the best educated workforce. Do that. Much like California, much like Minnesota, smart ideas, and go forward. The problem is we can't get the Republicans to understand that their ideology failed. Trickle-down supply-side voodoo Reaganomics has failed. Tax cuts do not create jobs. And it defies common sense to say that it does. But yet, we still get my rock-ribbed Republican conservative friends who are going to beat their chest and say, tax cuts, because that's what they've been fed ad nauseum. At some point, we have to push back on this. And this is part of why I'm going to the convention in Cleveland next week, to have those conversations with people who are going to spew it. We need more tax cuts. We need more deregulation. We need blah, 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 the right-wing ideology. And we've done all of those things. In the last 30-some years, we've been doing that. And what's it done? It's destroyed a middle class, the most prosperous in history. It's harmed our schools. It's harmed our infrastructure. It's harmed our communities. And then what are we left with? Well, we're left with low-paying jobs and less opportunity. And also, we're left with high poverty rates. And with high poverty rates comes high crime rates. So the question, when do we wake up and realize that the conservative ideology has failed us? Just an interesting time, an interesting thing to kind of ponder, especially what we're seeing from last week with the shootings and everything around there, to me, linked to poverty. And when we come back and talk a little bit about the Black Lives Matter movement, what's going on in Minnesota, what's going on in Louisiana and in Dallas, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Love to hear your thoughts on the matter. 1-888-520-RICK, 1-888-520-7425. Going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1968. That was the day that the American Indian movement began at a meeting in Minneapolis, Minnesota. A group of 200 Native Americans gathered together to discuss a response to the U.S. government's history of broken treaties and the devastating consequences on Native peoples. The statistics of unyielding poverty and high unemployment in Native communities were staggering. By 1970, 40% of the Native population lived in poverty. The unemployment rate was 10 times the national average. Life expectancy was only 44 years old. In the early 1970s, activists staged a series of occupations at Alcatraz, Wounded Knee, and at Mount Rushmore. Mount Rushmore is built on a site in the Black Hills that is sacred to the Oceti Sakowin, or the Great Sioux Nation. The United States government promised native rights to the land in a treaty that was broken when gold was discovered. In 1972, activists staged a Trail of Broken Treaties caravan, which ended in a 6-day occupation of the Bureau of Indian Affairs offices in Washington, D.C. They issued a statement that read, quote, "We seek a new American majority, a majority that is not content merely to confirm itself by superiority of numbers, but which conscience is committed toward prevailing upon the public will in ceasing wrongs and doing right." Beginning in the 1970s, the United States government began to respond to Native people's demands. A series of federal acts gave Native communities more control over their education and improving their health care. Lawsuits brought by tribes resulted in further economic autonomy. Yet by 2014, 1 in 4 Native people still lived in poverty. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Coleman Lowndes. Following the ambush of police officers during a peaceful Black Lives Matter protest in Dallas, Fox News figures blamed President Obama for speaking out against the recent police killings of 2 black men. Listen to Fox News contributor Kevin Jackson on Fox and Friends.
Barack Obama's speech helped to stoke this. I know people don't like to hear this, but we are not having an honest conversation around why this type of thing is occurring.
And Milwaukee County Sheriff and Fox regular David Clark on Fox and Friends.
But going back to President Obama, he's armed with powerful words, and he uses those words irresponsibly. It fuels this sort of anger toward the American police officer, and I wish he'd knock it off.
Despite Fox's attempt to point the finger at Obama, in his speech, the president acknowledged that the problem of disparate police force, quote, in no way contradicts our respect and appreciation for the vast majority of police officers. And following the Dallas shooting, the president stated that there was no possible justification for such a vicious, calculated, and despicable attack on law enforcement. For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happen!
We have struggled. We have prayed. We're still searching for something more. We have struggled. We still pray. We're looking for the chance to be free.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com, or give us a call, 1-888-520-RICK, 1-888-520-7425. Rudy Giuliani says that the Black Lives Matter folks are inherently racist and that black people should respect police. And absolutely, I agree that black people should respect police, as white people should respect police, as we should all respect the police. The fact that he takes that out and says just they, kind of interesting rhetoric if you think about it. We should have respect for the police, but on the other side of that, and this is what it got me thinking. On the other side of you should respect the police, they should respect you. And this is where, I've struggled with this with the scenario, with the situation that's going on. Because where I grew up as a kid, and I'm having these conversations with my children, where I grew up as a kid, you feared the police. You didn't respect them. You feared them. And in a lot of poverty communities, that's their goal. It's not about building relationships. It's not about gaining trust and all of that stuff. It's about fear. It's about intimidation. It's a war, and they have to win the war. And I saw that growing up as a kid. Now, look, I live in a neighborhood today where my kids view the police very differently than I did. Anytime I saw a cop as a kid, somebody was getting beat up or tuned up or arrested or whatever. My kids see the police as, the guy who drives down the street and gives glow sticks out at Halloween. The nice neighbor down the street who lets them flip the little lights on. That's the kind of police relations that we need to have in poverty communities. So when I see someone like Giuliani saying that, wow, these people who are clearly frustrated and clearly have had enough that they're now inherently racist is kind of ridiculous. And look, he's getting himself on TV. That's the goal. I have to say, though, as I sat and I watched the last several days unfold, my heart goes out to the Dallas Police Department, to the Dallas Transit Authority there, to the people who lost their lives. Lauren Aarons, a 48-year-old senior corporal and a 14-year veteran of the Dallas Police Department, his wife and their 2 children. Michael Kroll, a 40-year-old, 9-year veteran of the Dallas Police Department. Michael Smith, a 55-year-old officer at the police department there in Dallas, has 2 young daughters. Brent Thompson, a 43-year-old Dallas area rapid transit officer, the first killed in the line of duty in that organization, just got married 2 weeks ago. Patrick Zamarripa, 32-year-old, who just recently became a police officer. You look at this and your heart goes out to them and their families. Your heart goes out to them because this was a horrible tragedy. This was someone who clearly had some issues. And I'm not going to say the guy's name. He doesn't deserve that. These officers didn't deserve to die, but on the other side of this as well, the Alton Sterlings and the Philando Castiles, they didn't deserve to die either. And this is where I struggle, because I have respect for police. I have respect for the job that they do. For me, there are a lot of things that we should be standing with police and making sure that they're not put in these horrible situations where they feel there's nothing else that they can do but shoot somebody. I do find it interesting, though, that the NRA did not come to the defense of either of the 2, Alton Sterling and Philando Castile, who both had guns on them. And the justification in shooting the both of them was the gun. I look at the attorney for the police officer who shot Philando Castile, a Teamster brother, who was simply out in his car with his girlfriend and their daughter, and her daughter, a 4-year-old child. I love the attorney's justification of he was just doing good police work because this guy fit the description, and he was doing a standard investigatory stop. Which, you throw this out there and think about this, because if we allow this to happen to the Philando Castiles, and we allow this kind of stuff to happen to the Alton Sterlings, and we allow this stuff to happen to people who are just, it's a constant investigatory stop. What rights do you have left? The attorney said it had nothing to do with race. It had nothing to do with that. It was the gun. It had everything to do with the presence of a gun. Evidently, the guy felt that his hands were moving. I would be in big trouble because I talk with my hands a lot. And to me, I look at that argument of it was the gun and go, but how can you have a society of armed people and a police department who every time they see a gun, they're going to shoot? Or is it every time they see a black face with a gun, they shoot? A couple of listeners sent me this video of and I forget the guy who did it, but they set up scenarios where a white guy's walking down the street with an AR-15, and the police just come up and start asking him questions, to which he denies to answer the questions. And then they have the same scenario, black guy walking down the street with an AR-15, and he's basically, at gunpoint told to lay face down on the ground. They came, they handcuffed him, went through this whole thing. At any moment, that guy could have gotten shot because the gun was present. So it's interesting to me that we have different views on who can and who cannot carry a gun in these days. That's why the Black Lives Matter folks today, as I get, they've come out with their plan, their manifesto, if you will. And this is not new. I mean, for all the people who say, and I got to be honest, I'm surprised by some of the voices who have come out and say that they don't have a plan. Look, Black Lives Matter is not a monolithic organization. There are bunches of people involved in this. But the organization, as I understand, as I've been reading, they do have a clear idea of what they want to see. And part of it is ending what they call the broken window policing. And that's, a zero tolerance process in minor crimes. We're going to crack down on kids in schools. We're going to crack down in vandalism. We're going to crack down on all of these things with the iron fist of the law, in the hopes that it won't lead to more things. Yet what we know is that once you get caught doing a couple of little things, that begins to snowball into, well, it's too late now. Screw it. Might as well do some big stuff. And it's this zero tolerance policing that we see in minority and poor communities that really, really, honestly, gets into the privatization of policing. And that's one of the other things that they want done away with, the end of for-profit policing. This idea that we can write tickets and we can have petty arrests and we can, get fines and restitution, and all of this money that's then paid back into the government coffers is ridiculous. The idea that we're going to pay for policing by strictly enforcing laws. And I'll give you an example, one that still has me ticked off to this day. I got a ticket, a while ago for not stopping at a stop sign. When I looked at the ticket, looked like I stopped. Looked like a stop. I saw the video, looked like a stop. They go, no. You can just see the wheels still turning. I'm going, really, that kind of technicality on a street where there was nobody on the street at a time where there was nobody around? I understand you pull somebody over who runs through a stop sign and didn't even try and stop. Bang, get them. I get that. I get, someone who, does the half-hearted stop. I get that. But is it really necessary at dark, at night, to put a police officer in the kind of situation that he was in? And it's this kind of policing, and this is where they call for more training for police officers. And the broken windows policies, and the zero tolerance stuff, and the for-profit stuff. Give some more training and be a little more subjective, not just robots following rules. And this is where the police officers themselves should be saying, we don't want to be in these situations. We want to protect and serve. We want to do all of those things, but we shouldn't be controlling people's every movement. And that's where the training comes in. How people are trained, as I've been told now, is you shoot first, you ask questions later. Some of the other things that they're asking for is police cameras, put body cameras on, which, you look at the Alton Sterling video, the camera actually fell off. But, I guess that's one thing. They're asking for the demilitarization of our police departments. They're asking for them to have some control back for we the people, which I'm all in favor of. They're asking for limits on the use of force, and actually a way to have oversight to see when force is being used, how, why, investigations by a community-based organization, have community representation, all of those things, and have an independent investigatory body. You can't have the police investigating themselves. It doesn't work. I think if you go in some of those directions, you pursue that, things get a lot better. But at the end of the day, yes, I believe we have to respect the police officers who do a very difficult job. We have to respect their safety, their will, their rights. Absolutely. But they, in turn, have to respect ours. And that's where I think the street has gotten shut down. I see some of these videos going around. People send me all the time. There's no respect there. And that's a problem. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, a little bit more on this. Your thoughts, 1-888-520-RICK. Right back.
Uncovering the con in conservatism. Rick Smith.
This is Solidarity News on Radio Labour.
This is a Radio Labour special report recorded on July 11th, 2016. I'm C. Marie Ainsborough. The International Trade Union Confederation has partnered with a UN agency to help improve conditions for the world's 11.5 million migrant domestic workers. The ITUC is the organization which represents national labor centers at the world level. The UN agency is the International Labor Organization. The ILO has just released a report outlining how domestic workers can find decent work and be protected as they work. Michelle Layton is the chief of the ILO's labor migration branch.
The migration of women for work is not new, but it is growing. As more women enter the workforce, families are facing difficulty balancing paid work with domestic chores, and they are increasingly relying on domestic workers for help. Adding to these demands, life expectancy is increasing in many countries. In fact, experts estimate the number of people over the age of 65 will double by 2050. From 8% of the population today to nearly 16%. This means that there will be a growing number of elderly people who will need long-term care. And with our ever-changing world, other care needs are also emerging. At the same time, public budget for care services are shrinking. ILO studies show that over 11 million migrant workers now fill domestic care jobs. Many of these are women from poor countries with few employment opportunities. Today, nearly 1 in every 5 domestic workers in the world is a migrant, and of those, nearly 75% are women. In spite of the important contribution they make to our societies, most migrant domestic workers are not protected by labor laws and are vulnerable to exploitation. Because they are invisible, they may be trapped in abusive situations, and as migrants, they may fear making a complaint. This is why the ILO has made a priority to raise awareness about the needs of domestic workers and to improve the protection of all migrant workers. The ILO leads the Global Action Program for Migrant Domestic Workers and Their Families, a European Union-supported effort to promote the adoption of standards, policies, and good practices that can ensure migrant domestic workers' rights are upheld. Together with the International Trade Union Confederation, the International Domestic Workers Federation, UN Women, and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the ILO is working on a number of countries and key regions where domestic workers are particularly vulnerable to human and labor rights violations. The ILO is launching a report that presents concrete solutions to these challenges. If we're to ensure better protection for migrant workers, we need to work together to change mindsets, to recognize domestic work as work. The ILO is calling for closer cooperation between migrant domestic workers' home countries and the countries where they work.
The ILO is the UN organization which sets minimum labor standards for the world's working people. It has adopted international laws called conventions, which it suggests countries adopt. Convention 189 is aimed at getting domestic workers covered by national labor laws. If adopted, the conventions become part of the country's legal infrastructure. Myrtle Whitbuey is president of the International Domestic Workers Federation.
Many countries that I'm visiting don't actually have proper national labor laws. And I think in one way, the convention can help to actually push that government to have proper national laws. In the other way, like we look at countries that do have national laws, it can actually strengthen our debate and our negotiations with our government. Because now what's happening is that if my government has put something on hold, I can actually now say to my government that, no, sorry, you know, the ILO convention is saying that, and why are you putting things on hold? So I think the convention is becoming a strong weapon, and it's also becoming a negotiation weapon. At the same time, it's also becoming a capacity-building weapon, because what you're doing now, when you go out there and speak to domestic workers, you don't just speak to them about the labor laws, you're trying to explain to them what is Convention 189.
More information about the International Domestic Workers Federation can be found on its website at idwfed.org. I'm C. Marie Ainsborough. Thank you for listening.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. Bruce emailed me this story coming out of Louisiana. And, you know, again, it's another one of these moments where the optics, it's kind of the optics. Evidently, the guy who had first posted the video of Alton Sterling's demise, evidently this guy, within hours of the video being posted, had his own brush with law enforcement. Evidently, he's a guy who works on a military base there. He's from Atlanta. And evidently, he was at Dobbins Air Reserve Base. He was on his way to his job where he was arrested because he, I guess, fit the description. And how many times have you heard that? Well, he fit the description. Yeah, he's a guy. Yeah. They ran him through the whole, they arrested him. They had him, the military police there. They had the regular police. He was basically shackled and carried away. And then they said, well, you're not the guy. You fit the description, but you're not the guy. But, oh, by the way, while we've got you here, we found that you haven't paid your parking tickets. You've got these tickets, you didn't pay them. So you can't leave until you pay us $1,231, which evidently he didn't have, or he would have, like he said, I would have paid the tickets if I had the money. And again, another one of those moments where you go, isn't that odd that the guy who leaked the video, who didn't leak it, he put it out, that then he becomes the target of some type of police action. Now you could go, well, it's just, it's a minority community and they're all being arrested and they're all being harassed. And there's an argument there. I look at the Ferguson situation where I don't remember the exact numbers, but there may be 8,000 people who live in the community, and there were 16,000 outstanding warrants for a community of 8,000. To where it's just line them up. We'll eventually get to all of them. You may remember also that when Eric Garner was killed, the guy who released that video, he was also got the attention of police, if you will. He was arrested almost immediately after the video came. And it kind of makes you go, I don't know. Now, moving to Dallas, you look at that tragedy and you go, insanity on either side is not right. But I got to tell you, I'm a little weirded out by the use of a robot drone, if you will, a robot delivering a bomb. And we now know that the Dallas police had their bomb carrying robot deliver an explosive that ultimately killed the guy. And I don't know. I've been reading to see if there's ever been this kind of a thing that happens before. And you could go on, and I have a couple of thoughts on this. The first thought is for the safety of the public. Absolutely, you go. The guy's out of his mind. You take him out. There's that side of me. The law and order part of me goes, you got to get it. You got to get it stopped. Then there's the part of me that goes, I get that, but at how far do we let it go? Because you look at these police shootings, and a lot of them are on. Hey, I felt like my life was in jeopardy, and I look at the woman in Hummelstown who got off of shooting that guy who was face down in the snow with his hands kind of curled up under him because he was freezing. I felt harm was going to come to me, so I had to take him out. The first defense got away with that, and then became the norm. That's my fear with this. But I appreciate the emails, Bruce. It's kind of scary times we live in. Anyway, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, going to talk about what's going on in D.C. and around the country. Quick break, right back.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
No doubt you'll be thrilled to learn that we now live and work in a gig economy. That's the latest corporate buzz phrase from Silicon Valley. CEOs are hailing a brave new workplace in which we lucky worker bees no longer have to be stuck in traditional jobs with traditional hours, traditional middle-class pay scales, traditional benefits, traditional job security, and all those other fusty traditionals of the old workplace. In fact, in the gig economy, you don't even get a workplace. Rather, you'll be liberated to work in a series of short-term jobs in many places, always being on call through a mobile app on your iPhone or through a temp agency. How exciting is that? Well, they use exciting in the sense of distressing and nerve-wracking. The gig economy means you're on your own. You're not an employee, but, quote, an independent contractor with no rights and no union. You might have lots of calls to work this week, but there'll be many weeks with no calls. Don't get sick or injured, for no health care or workers' comp are provided. A pension? Your retirement plan is called Adios Chump. This alternative work arrangement is not a futuristic concept. It's already here and spreading fast. Some 16% of U.S. workers are now in this on-call, temporary, part-time, low-pay, you're-on-your-own economy, up from only 10% a decade ago. Corporate chieftains, backed by the economists and politicians they purchase, are creating what they call a workforce of non-employees for one reason: greed. It directly transfers more money and power from workaday families into the coffers of moneyed elites. This is Jim Hightower saying their gig economy is aptly named, for gigs are crude four-hook fishing devices that are drugged by commercial fleets through schools of fish to impale them, haul them in, and cash in on the pain.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
The most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Bill sent me an email during the break saying, I'm all in favor of sending the bomb-delivering robots in to kill that blah, 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 blah. A couple of expletives, things I can't say on the air. I said we should have used it sooner, should be using them more often to keep police officers safe. I agree that we need to keep police officers safe. Just a little weirded out about sending bomb-delivering robots around. Just my thought. Anyway, let's find out what's going on around the world in Washington, D.C. Victoria Jones, Talk Media News Service. Victoria, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you very much.
So what do you think? Bomb-delivering robots, we in favor of that?
You know, I'm hearing different things from the different talk show hosts that I talk to around the country. I'm having surprising people say, I'm fine with it, and then other surprising people saying, no, they shouldn't have done it. If he was still alive, we could find out a lot more. This is really dividing people.
Yeah, I'm a little weirded out by having, militarized any police department, and then sending in, these. I don't know. I'm a little weirded out by it.
Yeah, no, that's understandable.
Yeah. So what's the latest on the shootings and the killer?
Well, the latest on the shootings is that we have the Dallas police chief saying that they're receiving threats. They're taking every threat they get very seriously, and also saying that they are not second-guessing that decision to send in the robot at all. That they had people who had been shot, and who they believed were more people who were in danger. And let me see if I can find the quotation here. He says, "Already killed us in a grave way, and officers were in surgery that didn't make it. This wasn't an ethical dilemma for me," Chief David Brown said at a press conference today.
Yeah, if I'm him, I make that call without question, and I, from in his shoes, would do the same thing. For me, it's kind of a bigger policy issue kind of thought that I'm against.
Right. No, I understand. As far as the shooter himself, his mother is telling the Blaze website that her son wanted to be a police officer as a child, and his 6 years in the Army Reserve were not what Micah thought it would be, what he thought the military represented. It just didn't live up to his expectations. Also, there's a story on the Daily Beast, an interesting story, talking about how he was blacklisted by Black Power groups as unstable. Once his background had been gone into after he had wanted to join one of them, and they found out that he was discharged for sexual harassment from the Army, or was about to be. They labeled him unfit for recruitment, and that once he'd been labeled that way for one group, apparently the rest of the group effectively blacklisted him.
Yeah, they get around. But, the stories that I've been reading, he was radicalized. I mean, Fox News was throwing this out, that he was radicalized online. And I'm going, radicalized? Can't we just say he had some kind of mental problem and leave it at that? Have to make up a new word like radical? We've radicalized him online.
Yeah, I don't even know what that means, radicalized. I mean, I don't know whether you can just be a bad guy who, people didn't used to be radicalized online. They used to just be, was Timothy McVeigh radicalized? I don't know.
No, I think he was just crazy. But I guess you could argue being submerged in that and really heavily submerged in the militia culture and that, the right-wing extremist culture, and then having, I would argue, some mental problems to go along with it, just took him completely off the deep end. So I guess you could make an argument.
Well, and it's with the mental problems along with it,
right,
that always seems to be the key in these cases, isn't it?
Yeah, and then giving them guns and weapons, that doesn't seem to help.
It doesn't seem to help the situation. No, it doesn't. It just, and of course there are questions going on in Texas, among some anyway, about it being an open carry state and about the difficulties that police found after the shooting started of telling who the protesters were, some of those were carrying AR-15s, from who the potential shooters were.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Or was,
but here's the thing. I mean, and I had a couple of listeners send me this video, and maybe you've seen it. It's been banging around for a while, where they set up one of these moments where you had a white guy walking down the street with an AR-15 and then a black guy walking down the street with an AR-15, and two very different experiences.
Oh, I'll bet.
Where you basically got the black guy laid out in the middle of the street with everybody pointing their gun at him, and the white guy just kind of being scolded. But you shouldn't do that. It's nuts.
That's interesting. That's interesting. I haven't seen that video, but that's very interesting.
I'll have to find it and send it to you. Let's move on.
Yeah.
Let's move on. The big convention next week. Donald's going after Hillary, I guess, on her brains being overrated.
Yes, he gave an interview to the Washington Post, which is interesting in itself, because, he's banned the Washington Post from his event. They're a banned organization, but he still gave an interview to the Washington Post today. So I can't figure that out. He was mostly to talk about his vice presidential pick, but he also talked about Hillary Clinton. He said she's highly overrated in the brains department. She is really bad at reacting under pressure. Of himself, Trump said, "I was always a good athlete. adding, under pressure, some good athletes become bad athletes, referring to her. And he said whether it was the war or the emails, she got worse and worse and worse.
I actually have no idea where to go with that. I mean, if that isn't the pot calling the kettle black, I mean, there's someone who's in intellect highly overrated as well.
And what is interesting about this is that whatever her intellect, when you look at how she's responded under pressure, I mean, she testified for 11 hours before a hostile House committee. She didn't really fold.
No, she did well. I mean, that actually helped propel her a little bit further at it. As I remember, it turned her poll numbers around.
It did. She did well under pressure in that situation. So it's kind of interesting. He's giving a speech today, mostly about Veterans Affairs, but not entirely about Veterans Affairs. He's calling himself the law and order candidate, criticizing her on her private email server. He's also saying he's the candidate of compassion. Believe it, he added. But you can't have true compassion without providing safety. And he described Clinton as weak, ineffective, pandering, and either a liar or grossly incompetent. He also said that on his ideas for Veterans Affairs, he contrasted his ideas with those from crooked Hillary Clinton, as he called her the secretary of the status quo. He said that she would pursue policies benefiting only the nation's elite. For others, she couldn't care less, he said.
But as I understand, he wants to privatize the VA, right?
He wants to give people the option of seeing doctors outside the VA.
Which, again, leads to privatization.
Potentially.
Yeah, I mean, because at the end of it, you then start dividing the pot. And to me, I say we should be fully funding the VA, making sure that it is funded properly, which it hasn't been over the last several years, and strengthen it. Not all of these other Band-Aid gimmicky tricks. Just not the way to go. Understand that Congress is back. They going to get anything done before the recess?
It's not clear. The one thing they might get done in the Senate is a bill that passed the House that deals with opioid addiction and has a number of ideas in it to fight to deal with the opioid epidemic ravaging certain states in the country. It's not clear if it's going to pass in the Senate because it doesn't have funding. It proposes it, but it doesn't provide it, and Democrats oppose it because of that. But there's some pressure on them to support it anyway because it's better than nothing.
Right. So we'll pursue a policy, just not put any money in it, so nothing gets done. But at least we feel good that we did something. I got it.
Well, I think some of the things will get done, but a lot of the things won't get done unless money is appropriated for it separately.
Yeah, because they're doing the same thing here in Pennsylvania. The opioid addiction is a big part of our budget, or part of our budget. But the governor is going to let it go into law and not sign it because it's not paid for. And he's going, well, we can do all these things, great, but you got to add some funding to it. We got to fix the giant hole in our funding where we can't do all these things.
Right.
It's crazy.
Exactly.
And finally, I understand that there are some folks trying to get Paul Ryan to halt his investigation into Planned Parenthood.
Yes. Democrats were trying to do that a few weeks ago, and they didn't have much success. Democrats on the committee that's investigating Planned Parenthood, and now dozens of liberal-leading advocacy groups like the NAACP, the SEIU, AFSCME, Communication Workers of America, Human Rights Campaign, all kinds of things, the Sierra Club, they have written to Paul Ryan, the Speaker, saying, look, you've got to disband this 10-month investigation. They say it exists solely for political purposes. They say it offends basic standards of fairness and respect for the rights of American citizens. They also say it sets a dangerous precedent for congressional investigations because basically what they say it does is that, that there's no basis for it, so it just sets a precedent for a later investigation on any group that happens to draw the ire of the majority.
And that's surprising to us. I mean, I look at some of these investigations recently, and the amount of money, the time, the energy. I go, if we were to spend that kind of time and energy and actually doing something constructive, we'd be a much better off country.
This is Congress.
Yeah, that's true. You got a point. I guess you're right. Are you going to any of the conventions? You plan on it?
Looks like I'm probably going to the Democratic convention in a couple of weeks' time in Philadelphia.
Well, good. I look forward to seeing you there.
Will you be there? You'll be there, right? Yeah.
We plan on attending both of the conventions because, I'm looking forward to the insanity.
Oh, well, I think you're going to have a blast at the Republican convention.
That is the plan. Victoria, great talking with you. I appreciate the time.
Thank you so much.
Always great talking with you, Victoria Jones, Talk Media News Service. And look, the conventions, looking forward to that in a big way. Love to hear your thoughts. What do you want to hear? What kind of questions do we ask either side? The Republican one coming up next Monday, going to start off there. What issues are important? Which topics should we be going after? I am obviously going to be going after a lot of the labor stuff, the rights to collective bargaining, joining unions, minimum wage, prevailing wage laws, all of the things that the Republicans have staked their ground and not in favor of. And we're going to find out why. Give them an opportunity to come talk with us if they will. Now, the last time I went to one of these events, Rick Santorum said, no, I'll do any show here but that one. I kind of wear that as a badge of honor. I do. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Corporations give billions of welfare, while millions in this country don't have a dime to spare. Corporations give billions of welfare, while millions in this country don't have a dime to spare. Millions in this country don't have a dime to spare. Multi-billions in this country get not a dime to spare.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. Philando Castile, the black man shot to death by police in Minnesota, was a member of Teamsters Local 320 in Minneapolis. In the wake of protests against his killing and the horrific killings of police officers in Dallas, Teamsters Local 320 President Sammy Gabriel told Workers Independent News that the local is feeling the terrible loss of Philando and plans to be involved in helping to support his family.
It's a tragedy to have one of our Teamster members who's been with us as a Teamster since 2002. Phil was a gentle soul, well-respected, nutrition service supervisor, was well-respected by the staff that he supervised every day and by the kids and staff that he fed breakfast and lunch to every day. It's truly heart-wrenching.
Gabriel says that Local 320 also represents some law enforcement officers in Minnesota, though not the one who shot and killed Castile.
We have a lot of law enforcement. This is equally heart-wrenching for those members that see these acts of violence. And, of course, Dallas rips your heart out, and you feel for your brother officers that are going on the street every day, even with what's happening, continue to go out and do their job day after day.
This is Mitch Lawrence with the Sports Minute for Workers Independent News. Kevin Durant wants to win an NBA championship so badly, he's willing to go to the Golden State Warriors to get one. That's what's known as taking the easy way out, because in the last 2 seasons alone, the Warriors have won a title, reached the finals twice, and already have one of the game's premier players in Stephen Curry, their 2-time MVP. If that's not taking the easy road to a title, then I don't know what is. But Kevin Durant doesn't want to admit the obvious, so he's gotten himself into a lot of trouble with what he said since he's left the Oklahoma City Thunder. He used a basic philosophy: if you can't beat them, join them. But in doing so, Durant has insulted all basketball fans with his claim that winning with the Warriors is the hardest road to take. In explaining his decision, he actually said, quote, "I don't know anybody here," unquote. Please spare us. Durant knows everyone on his new team, starting with Draymond Green. He and the Warriors' bad boy conducted a season-long conversation via text messages. It was in those messages that Green did a lot of the recruiting. If that doesn't sound quite kosher, well, it's not illegal by NBA rules, but the optics are bad. It certainly doesn't look good that while he was supposed to be trying to beat the Warriors, he was actually engaged in conversations with their players. And now Kevin Durant's taking the easy way out. He'll never admit it, but that's all you need to know about the newest Golden State Warrior.
Brought to you by the IBEW, 750,000 men and women powering the way for an American comeback. Information on how to become an International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Power Professional is online at ibew.org.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
I will oppose the Colombia Free Trade Agreement.
Now it's time to clear the way for a series of trade agreements.
You can trust me.
From the Monongahela Valley to the Mesabi Iron Range, to the coal mines of Appalachia, the story's always the same. 700 tons of metal a day. Now so you tell me the world's changed. Once I made you rich enough to forget my name. In Youngstown.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So the 14th round of negotiations began in Brussels today, as I understand, for the European Union-U.S. trade agreement, the TTIP. And there's some leaked documents, I guess, obtained by Friends of the Earth Europe, who are claiming that this could be a catastrophe for the environment. And again, you look at these trade deals, these giant, massive deals, and you go, are they good for average, everyday working people? Are they good for the workers in either country? And for me, increasingly, the answer is no. And in fact, increasingly so much that the Republicans in their platform say that we need better negotiated trade agreements that put America first. A central tenet of Trump's campaign, but also in the platform for the Republicans. And Democrats got some language. Some of my friends a little upset by it. Here to talk a little bit about this and other stuff, I've asked Celeste Drake. She's the trade guru with the AFL-CIO. Celeste, thanks for taking time for us.
Sure, happy to be here.
So I look at these agreements, and the Republican Party has now kind of come around and going, hey, maybe we need to be looking at these a little differently. Are you surprised by the platform committee there with the GOP coming this way?
Not really. I mean, you look at their 2012 platform, and it was pretty cheerleader, rah-rah, go, Trans-Pacific Partnership. But I think that the reality is, for both parties and for, unaffiliated Americans, across the board, folks are starting to realize that, what's called a trade agreement isn't necessarily just about trade, and folks are starting to say, wait a minute, let's take a more critical look. If these are just deals that set up a system that rushes the race to the bottom, that enhances opportunities for offshoring, that really allows global corporations to abuse workers, both here and abroad, without really facing serious consequences under a trade deal, that matters sort of no matter which party you're in, and the leadership of both parties, I think, are hearing that message.
Yeah, and about time, because, I've been screaming about this for a very long time. But what's interesting to me is, and I've gotten a lot of email on this, of people saying that the Democrats didn't go far enough. I know there are some labor folks who are saying, it's great, we've got some language, but there's some people going, look, we didn't get an explicit, visceral reaction to the TPP and the platform. And there are some who are saying it's a loss for Senator Sanders.
Some are saying that, and I get it. I was watching C-SPAN over the weekend and saw that very passionate debate. But, the fact is, we move the needle on trade in the Democratic platform. And the language was amended to be more robust in terms of spelling out opposition to investor-state dispute settlement, which are private courts for investors that come in under the TPP, that wages and jobs really have to be going in a positive direction for workers, or a deal's not good enough, and that the deals have to address currency manipulation. These are all strengths. And, I think, looking at it, the TPP, for whatever reason, most in labor aren't sure why the president is pushing the TPP, but this is something that he is pushing. So, what was the platform, going to say, given the president's position? I think we ended up in a pretty good place.
Yeah,
and folks should remember that regardless of what the platform says, it's not a binding document, and it's really important, more so what the nominee is committed to. And Hillary Clinton's folks came out with a press statement right after the vote saying, Hillary Clinton's position on the Trans-Pacific Partnership is well established and well known. She opposes the TPP both before and after the election. She made clear that she's not interested in tinkering around the edges and believes we need a new approach to trade that protects jobs, raises incomes, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, regardless of the disappointment that folks feel, people need to take this as a win. The needle was moved, and it's clear where the Democratic Party stands, and they stand in a place of saying the TPP just isn't good enough.
Yeah, so the question then becomes, with this win, as you're calling it, does this mean that the air is out of the balloon, that we won't see the TPP passed by the end of the year? Because I think most people agree that if Hillary wins, she won't pursue it. At least I hope that's the case. That's what she said. So the fear is between now and the end of the year, right?
There is a big fear between now and the end of the year, and frankly, the Ambassador Froman, who's been the biggest driver of this in the administration, is continuing to speak publicly and, as far as we know, to Congress about how to move the TPP before the year is out. So this is going to be a continuing battle, almost no matter what happens at the convention. This is going to be a battle, and labor is united in its opposition to the TPP and in our fight to defeat it if it comes up, and frankly, to make sure that there's no window of opportunity to allow it to come up.
And that's the important part, and that's why we need to be contacting our representatives early and often. But, a second ago, you said you're not sure why the president's pursuing it. There's part of me that goes, we've been so ingrained to think that these trade deals, we've been told so often, you pass these trade deals, jobs will be created. It's all about the jobs. It's the job scam, if you will. And there's part of me that goes, he really believes out of this will come economic activity that will grow jobs, and it'll make us, more competitive. And the sad reality is, and maybe you can attest to this, is that hasn't been the reality of the last trade agreements. The last trade agreements have shown massive job losses.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate, because what's the popular wisdom, sort of, both in Washington, D.C., political circles, and, if you just take a basic economics class, is that, trade's always good for both sides. But when you even parse out that initial theory, it never says it's good for every single individual. It really says, if two countries drop tariffs and trade, there will be growth, economic growth on both sides. But right. You have serious questions, even under that model, about what internal economic policies do these countries have to make sure that growth is widely shared. If the U.S. Experiences growth from a trade agreement, but 100% of that growth goes to one individual, right? That's sort of the most extreme case. How is anybody else better off? And that's even assuming there aren't losses, right? If everybody else stayed the same and it all went to one, you're like, why is that a good policy?
You're right.
But what happens is, these agreements are not just about tariffs. They're about special legal rights for foreign investors. They're about increasing monopoly rights for pharmaceutical companies which produce life-saving medicines, and that makes medicines more expensive. These agreements are about what they're calling regulatory harmonization or regulatory coherence, which is sort of a dumbing down of our protections for health and safety and the environment. They're about so much more than just traditional trade, and the facts are we don't have a system that allows equitable sharing. So we have, a certain number of workers who are harmed directly by losing jobs, 700,000 or so from NAFTA, 3.2 million from the addition of China to the World Trade Organization, about 100,000 from the more recent Korea trade agreement. But we also have a large percentage of American workers, about 2/3 of American workers, who were hurt by wage suppression. The Economic Policy Institute says that, the average worker who doesn't have a bachelor's degree, which is about 2/3 of American workers, they lose $1,800 per year in income due to trade-induced wage suppression. So there's a lot more going on than the traditional sort of, free trade analysis would tell you. And I think we're starting to have that conversation that this is about more than tariffs, that it's about jobs, but it's about more than jobs. And it's really very seriously going to affect how we can make economic decisions in the future. Because if any foreign investing company can come in and say to the U.S., basically, I'm going to hold you for ransom and make you pay me off if you pass this law or this regulation that I don't like, then we're constrained. And that's not helpful for our economy. It's not helpful for our democracy. It's just not the way that American families want to live and make our decisions collectively and democratically.
Right, I'm with you. But, you talked about harmonization there for a second, and I'm not entirely against the idea of harmonizing our laws as long as they're the high road laws. I mean, you look at NAFTA, which brought us this concept of least restrictive trade barrier. And you go, I'm sorry, that race to the bottom, that free fall, terminal velocity, free fall to the bottom, not the direction we should be going. I would be in favor of it. We're taking the most restrictive trade barrier with regard to the environment and labor laws and giving people the ability to use investor state courts to be able to sue for workers and for the environment. And maybe it's not a bad idea.
That's a great point, Rick. And I think that's right. It's the rules that have been put in place so far. And these are the rules that are in the TPP, that are in the WTO, as you mentioned, in the NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. They allow countries and companies to fight over standards that they view are too high and therefore a trade barrier. So it's why the U.S. Congress repealed recently, just this year, country of origin labeling for meat. That was identified by the World Trade Organization as a trade barrier. And therefore, we now are not allowed to know as consumers where our meat comes from. The U.S. has readjusted the policy on tuna-safe dolphin labeling several times because we keep losing that battle at the WTO. So there is a way that you could write these rules to say you have to meet the highest standard, or you could really find out if standards are completely equivalent and therefore different standards would be okay as long as you're getting the same amount of protection for our lives, for our health, for our environment. But right now the rules aren't written that way. And so we've got to fight. And because we were denied the opportunity to amend the TPP by fast track, we've got to fight this TPP. And then, we should go back to the table and start saying, to our trading partners, how do we drive this race to the top? Because what we really want is high wages for American workers, high wages for foreign workers. We want to have the right to organize a union, work together, collectively negotiate with our employer. We want to make sure that workers in other countries have the same, because that's how we all do better. And that's the whole union slogan. We all do better when we all do better. Well, the TPP won't make us all do better.
Right. I mean, that whole rising tide lifts all boats thing. You want to make sure that your boat gets lifted and not crushed.
Yes, exactly. We don't want the flood to come in and spill us all out.
And sadly, that's where this
water.
is. Sadly, this is the kind of trade agreement we've got. So, and bringing it back to the politics, I think this is why Trump has, they say a blind squirrel finds a nut occasionally. This is the blind squirrel finding the nut, because I think the American people are really ticked off with the job losses, the stagnant wages, and really just the destruction of a middle class that's been taken from us, and not by choice. I think they're frustrated and angry.
Yeah, and he's speaking to that. But the problem is that his opposition to the TPP doesn't go very deep, right? We hear that he has realized it's a great talking point, but can we trust him? He seems to not believe it when it comes to his own businesses. He produces his Trump tie line, overseas. He's offshored jobs himself. He has been involved in union busting behavior. He has talked about how he has a 100% record on right to work and reversed himself on whether or not he supports an increased minimum wage. So, just because it's a positive talking point doesn't mean he really is for a worker-centric form of trade and a form of trade that would raise wages and standards and protect workers and protect the environment. So, but he is, talking to a real angst that workers and families feel, and we just feel that workers, is he the person that you want to trust on trade policy, or is the AFL-CIO who you want to trust on trade policy? Because we have a lot of good ideas, not just about, jobs and wages, but addressing these special privileges for foreign investors and making sure that trade agreements aren't an obstacle to affordable health care, and making sure that we protect the right of municipalities to offer public services, and all of these other things that could be a threat under trade agreement. You've got to have a holistic view, and it's got to be more than a one note of, I've heard y'all have lost some jobs, so I'm going to spout, opposition to the TPP, but I'm not really sure what I'm for.
So last question I've got for you then. And am I hearing you say, that you don't really think Trump would do anything, heaven forbid, that he was elected president, that this is just all hot air? Is that what I'm getting?
That's pretty much what you're getting. He is in no way a pro-worker candidate. I don't believe he'd be a pro-worker president. And I think, his talking points on trade might sound good, but you've got to dig a little deeper and see, what he as a candidate really stands for. And it's not shared prosperity and worker rights and growing wages for all of us. And we've got to get that. And to do that, we've got to elect Hillary Clinton, not Donald Trump.
There you go. Celeste, I appreciate you taking time for us. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Always great talking with you. Celeste Drake. She is the head of the globalization and trade policy there at the AFL-CIO. Let's take a quick break. Back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Sanity and rational thought back to America. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1892. Striking silver miners in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, blew up the Frisco Mill. The miners were upset because the company had hired Pinkerton guards to infiltrate the mine. Working conditions in the northern Idaho mining district were terrible at that time. Many workers were injured, and some died because of lack of mine safety. When mine owners wanted to purchase new equipment, they cut costs by increasing working hours and decreasing miners' pay. In response, the miners decided to strike. The mine owners, unsurprisingly, brought in scabs. Some scabs were persuaded to honor the strike. The mine owners also hired Pinkertons to infiltrate the ranks of the strikers. One Pinkerton, Charlie Sharingo, was so successful at gaining the confidence of the strikers that he became the union's recording secretary. The infiltrator had access to the union's financial records and relayed all information he uncovered to the mine owners. By early July, Union miners suspected Sharingo was a spy. The miners became more militant, and in the very early hours, miners gathered to stop a trainload of scabs from entering the mine. Pinkerton guards were brought in to protect the incoming scabs. A shootout between the guards and the miners erupted. It was unclear who shot first, but the miners retaliated by dropping a box of powder down a flume in the Frisco Mill. The box exploded, and one company employee was killed. A battle broke out at a nearby mine, and 3 miners were killed before owners surrendered. 3 mines fell into the hands of the workers by that evening. The governor of Idaho declared martial law and sent in the Idaho National Guard to break the union. These events helped to lead to the creation of the Western Federation of Miners. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Tales of American Political History with Clinton Porter Hackney.
Back in 1977, an American researcher was searching through a large bound volume of documents from the Department of State that were about to be declassified. As was the norm, the page-by-page review was painstaking. But every now and then, such research produces important historical information, or in this case, a fun little nugget of interest. A very well-written signature at the bottom of a short letter had caught the reader's attention. Not only was the signature well-written, but the name was also well-known. So he began to read. It was dated at the top, November 6, 1940, a 37-year-old note from afar, and it was addressed to Mr. Franklin Roosevelt, who was President of the United States. In the letter, Roosevelt's name was misspelled, as were many other words, and there was a clear problem with the English language. Join us again for more of a youngster's note to Roosevelt. This is Clinton Porter Hackney at cphackney.com.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happy!
Story coming out of Wichita, Kansas. You may remember a couple of years ago we had talked about this with the president of the SPEA union, the Society of Professional Engineering Employees in Aerospace. Ray Goforth was here explaining, and this is a couple of years back, so I'm surprised this has taken this long. But today, 24 older employees who were terminated by Spirit Aerosystems. They were fired in July of 2013 when I remember this story popping up. They have filed an age discrimination lawsuit today. They are all members of the Society of Professional Engineering Employees in Aerospace, SPEA. The suit filed by the AARP Foundation Litigation, or AFL. They are a Washington, D.C. based component of the AARP Foundation, who go after these kind of age discrimination suits. The suit was filed in U.S. District Court in Wichita, Kansas, and it alleges that Spirit terminated its older employees who were covered by their health insurance plan, who had either costly medical conditions or who had family members who had expensive health issues. Employees' health issues cited in the lawsuits include heart disease, cancer, diabetes, high blood pressure, hearing loss, brain aneurysm, and gout. I do remember this because I remember the story and talking with Ray, who said, they fired this guy who the wife had, almost terminal cancer, and ended the health insurance with bogus reviews, and the suit goes into this. Into how they had a flawed system of giving people who were 40 years old and above low performance ratings so they could get rid of them. They could kick them to the curb because, hey, they're more expensive to provide health care for. And, oh, by the way, a couple of weeks before the firings on July 25th, 2013, the company had changed their health insurance coverage. They had gone from an underwritten plan to one that was self-funded. And you go, that's odd that you would go from a plan that you pay an underwriting fee, and it's one of the companies who, they take on the risk, to a plan where you're going to save a boatload of money short term, especially if you can get younger workers and you can keep younger people in and have them having great health care and not using it. I just had this conversation this morning with my doctor who said, what kind of health care you got? Because we can decide to do this or that. And I said, well, I've probably got the best health care money can buy that I never use. I've gone to the doctor twice this entire year. Last year, I think I went once the entire year. So you're spending, $10,000, $15,000 on healthcare and using maybe $500 worth. That's what these companies want, especially the ones that move this self-insured route, which they're claiming that they did. Now, one of the people who named in the suit, Donetta Raymond, she worked at the Wichita plant for 25 years when she was fired. She said Sprint's decision to fire its older workers after years of dedicated service was shocking. She said Sprint ushered us out like we had done something wrong when we had not. Our worlds were turned upside down because we had worked there for so long. And, you stop and you think about it. You've spent 20, 25 years, 30 years working for a company, and you have your health care and you have all this stuff, and all of a sudden they rip it out from under you. And this is why, again, to me, it's important that you have union representation, that you have the ability to pursue things like this. And look, they do have the union fighting for them, and also coming together. And I think something positive could come out of this. The question then becomes, and this is where you go back and you go, what should be the punishment for doing these kind of things? When these companies pull this stuff, what should the punishment be? Should it just be, we'll give you lost wages and we'll pay for, this or that? What about the family who, maybe they lost health insurance and the ailment that they had didn't get the treatment that they needed, and it's cost them years of their lives? What's that worth? What's it worth where you go, well, you didn't take the cancer medicine that you needed and a loved one passed on? What's that worth? I mean, we've allowed these companies way too much control. And for me, the idea of having employer-based health care has always been one of those things that makes me go, why did we allow that? Why do we continue to pursue that? Why do we continue to put that in their hands? And to me, again, this presidential cycle, there's an opportunity to start looking at how do we undo that? Employer-based health care is a bad idea. It's been a bad idea from the beginning. It's a bad idea now. It was a bad idea then. And it's going to be a worse idea coming forward because with the centralization of information, this was another conversation I had this morning about medical records being all digitized and everything being at the touch of your fingers, all of this information that's out there. You kind of have to go, now what are the insurance companies going to be able to deny you over? And if you have a really motivated company, to me, like this is a very motivated company. Fired 24 employees who have been there, years. Dedicated employees who've been there years. She got rid of them for healthcare costs. That should scare every one of us. Because guess what? I don't care how old you are now. You're going to get old. It's going to happen. Sad. I wish the folks at SPIA the best and the AARP as well. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around.
This is Solidarity News on Radio Labour.
This is a Radio Labour special report recorded on July 11th, 2016. I'm C. Marie Ainsborough. The International Trade Union Confederation has partnered with a UN agency to help improve conditions for the world's 11.5 million migrant domestic workers. The ITUC is the organization which represents national labor centers at the world level. The UN agency is the International Labour Organization. The ILO has just released a report outlining how domestic workers can find decent work and be protected as they work. Michelle Layton is the chief of the ILO's Labour Migration Branch.
The migration of women for work is not new, but it is growing. As more women enter the workforce, families are facing difficulty balancing paid work with domestic chores, and they are increasingly relying on domestic workers for help. Adding to these demands, life expectancy is increasing in many countries. In fact, experts estimate the number of people over the age of 65 will double by 2050, from 8% of the population today to nearly 16%. This means that there will be a growing number of elderly people who will need long-term care. And with our ever-changing world, other care needs are also emerging. At the same time, public budget for care services are shrinking. ILO studies show that over 11 million migrant workers now fill domestic care jobs. Many of these are women from poor countries with few employment opportunities. Today, nearly 1 in every 5 domestic workers in the world is a migrant, and of those, nearly 75% are women. In spite of the important contribution they make to our societies, most migrant domestic workers are not protected by labor laws and are vulnerable to exploitation. Because they are invisible, they may be trapped in abusive situations, and as migrants, they may fear making a complaint. This is why the ILO has made a priority to raise awareness about the needs of domestic workers and to improve the protection of all migrant workers. The ILO leads the Global Action Program for Migrant Domestic Workers and Their Families, a European Union-supported effort to promote the adoption of standards, policies, and good practices that can ensure migrant domestic workers' rights are upheld. Together with the International Trade Union Confederation, the International Domestic Workers Federation, UN Women, and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the ILO is working on a number of countries and key regions where domestic workers are particularly vulnerable to human and labor rights violations. The ILO is launching a report that presents concrete solutions to these challenges. If we're to ensure better protection for migrant workers, we need to work together to change mindsets, to recognize domestic work as work. The ILO is calling for closer cooperation between migrant domestic workers' home countries and the countries where they work.
The ILO is the UN organization which sets minimum labor standards for the world's working people. It has adopted international laws called conventions, which it suggests countries adopt. Convention 189 is aimed at getting domestic workers covered by national labor laws. If adopted, the conventions become part of the country's legal infrastructure. Myrtle Witbooi is president of the International Domestic Workers Federation.
Many countries that I'm visiting don't actually have proper national labor laws. And I think in one way the convention can help to actually push that government to have proper national laws. In the other way, like we look at countries that do have national laws, it can actually strengthen our debate and our negotiations with our government. Because now what's happening is that if my government has put something on hold, I can actually now say to my government that, no, sorry, you know, the ILO convention is saying that, and why are you putting things on hold? So I think the convention is becoming a strong weapon, and it's also becoming a negotiation weapon. At the same time, it's also becoming a capacity-building weapon, because what you're doing now, when you go out there and speak to domestic workers, you don't just speak to them about the labor laws, you're trying to explain to them what is Convention 189.
More information about the International Domestic Workers Federation can be found on its website at idwfed.org. I'm C. Marie Ainsborough. Thank you for listening.
TheRickSmithShow.com. So I guess it's good news that the governor is going to allow the budget to go into law, even if it is without his signature, in the event that the General Assembly here in Pennsylvania doesn't pass additional revenue. Again, there's part of me that says you should be fighting for that additional revenue. But here to talk a little bit about what he sees in the budget, what it means, what the priorities are. We've asked Kevin Mahoney, Editor Zero over at the Raging Chicken Press, to come talk with us. Kevin, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, man, you got it. I'll tell you, it's I was away for a week, and I decided to go swimming with my phone, which put me off the news stuff for a little bit. And I come back, it feels like the world has gone like crazy, and I come back here, and they're kind of playing around with virtual budgets, pretending they know how to do politics. It's unbelievable.
Oh, and that's a good way of putting it, virtual politics. Because at the end of the day, while there may be a budget, the question is one, is it paid for? And two, is it enough?
No, it's like, I mean, I'm telling you, I'm looking at this thing, of course, I'm paying attention a lot, especially, I work in higher education, so I'm paying attention to, what's going to happen in education. And I look at, Governor Wolf's page, right? Like, here's all the increases for education, like historic increases. And then I'm like reading the next page and it's like, yeah, but they got no idea how to pay for this stuff. So it's all, I mean, it's like this, it's like walking into, a hall of mirrors of public relations right now. And it'd be funny if it wasn't so serious.
Yeah, I mean, it's where I was at the beginning, where I said at the beginning of the show, I go, it's great to say you have historic increases, but what happens after the election when the bills come due and you don't have the money for it? Because, to me, this is, while you're saying it's our priorities to do a little bit of this stuff, this is an election year budget.
Oh, totally. I look at this and I'm saying, you know what? I can do better than this. Watch this. Watch this. It says $81.4 million for PASHE and state-related schools. Okay, are you ready, Rick?
Hit me.
$100 million. I just did it. I just increased the budget. It's the same thing.
Wow.
It's all games at this point, and it's sad, And actually, was watching Governor Wolf coming out and talking about why he's going to let this budget kind of become law. And it's like, I'm almost like, does he got like a smirk on his face? Because, in some ways, it is a calling of the bluff of the Republicans in some ways, right? It's basically saying, okay, you guys don't want to have a serious budget. We tried it my way last year. Have at it.
And you could make the argument that is a really good political tactic. But again, is it good for the Commonwealth?
Well, that's the problem. I mean, that's exactly the problem. It is definitely not good for the Commonwealth. It's not good for our schools. It's not good for our roads. I was away, I was visiting my parents in central New York, which is, upstate New York, kind of the Adirondacks and stuff. And, my wife is, grew up in Pennsylvania, and we're driving up there, and we get into New York, we drive around. She's like, hey, the roads are nice up here. And then we came back a different way. We drove through New York, and then we drove through New Jersey. And she said, wow, look at these roads over here. As soon as we crossed the border, over the bridge, over the Delaware into Pennsylvania, suddenly the potholes, the cones, you got to watch what you're going. You can barely stay on the road in certain places. And, this is kind of what we're looking at. As much as that might be a good political move, and, I can't say that I can actually blame the governor for making that move at this point. I mean, it seems to be a move out of exasperation. But to say that this is the state of our politics is unbelievable. And, I was looking at in New York State, you got all sorts of games that go on there, and you've got, one of the most corrupt legislatures in across the country. And yet, right, they're still not doing what we do here in Pennsylvania, right? They're still not kind of playing these kinds of games with budgets and playing complete political brinkmanship and virtual politics like we're doing here in this state. And I'm sorry to say that that's the case because, it's going to impact people directly.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. They've got, as you pointed out, one of the most corrupt systems, but yet their roads still get paved.
Incredible, isn't it?
How does that happen when they actually still do what needs to get done and yet be corrupt?
Well, at the very least in New York State is that you've got, you had all these political machines there, right? So people want to make sure people back in their home districts are taken care of, right? So things like roads, things like even schools to a certain degree, although, New York's got its own issues going on with schools because you have this kind of corporate education kind of getting pushed. And you've got a governor who's a Democrat up there who's, also pushing really big on the kind of charterization of schools and the same kind of issues that we're facing here in Pennsylvania. But still, there seems to be some degree of kind of wanting to give back to your constituents to make sure at least, the roads are paved and they got some baseline things. here it just seems like, they've secured themselves so much and protected themselves so much from any chance of being defeated in election because of the gerrymandering that they can just go 100% ideological and play these political games. And I think really that's what it comes down to, Rick. I think it comes down to the fact that they are not in a position, the bulk of the legislators out there in Harrisburg, especially the Republican Party, are so insulated from their own constituents that they're no longer responding to the constituents. They're just either pure ideology or who's ever got the biggest paycheck to fill their pockets with.
The sad thing is that isn't how it's supposed to be.
No, it's not. It's not. And I can remember as a kid, coming down to Philadelphia, and I was a geek for politics and a geek for history back then, and going into Independence Hall, watch where the Constitution was signed, and learning about the kind of Pennsylvania is kind of the cradle for this democracy. It's really, really sad and kind of depressing to see that this is the state that we're in now. That people are just turn their backs on that kind of promise and that history, and and especially look at that that education funding, knowing that this is supposed to be something that everyone has sworn, all those legislators out there in Harrisburg have sworn to uphold a constitutional amendment guaranteeing public education for all citizens and fair and equitable, and it's just nowhere near.
So, do you see any chance of a funding stream being passed by midnight tonight?
I can't see it. If it happens, I can't imagine it's going to be anything but a gimmick. But who knows? I mean, maybe they'll rob Peter to pay Paul. Maybe they'll come up with some sort of little accounting scheme to make it look like they've raised money. But they're not going to tax the drillers, right? That they're not going to close the Delaware loophole, right? That they're not going to raise taxes on the rich. So where else is the money? I mean, they've bled us all dry as it is now, right? Now I look at. And frankly, I can't imagine that they're not going to look for ways just to take money away from other programs. That's how they've done it up until now. So, and meanwhile, I just saw that the Commonwealth Foundation has released this, tweeted out that, hey, you know what? The way that we can improve our bond rating that's tanking right now is spend even less than we're doing now. Right? And I think that, frankly, it's just a recipe for disaster.
It is a recipe for disaster. But at the end of the day, what has happened over the last 30 years is we've been trained as a society to believe that we need less government spending because the private sector, they create the jobs and we should give them tax cuts and all of this stuff, basically to starve state government, to starve the government, much like Grover Norquist said, so you can drag it in the bathtub and drown it. We've been trained as a society to buy this rhetoric, and yet our roads are crumbling, as you've pointed out. Our education system is struggling. The things that do create jobs, we're really not investing in.
No, and we're not investing in the things that create jobs, and we're not investing in things that create a vibrant community. Right, we're not investing in those things that actually keep us together and bind us together. This is becoming a kind of an all for one, all for one and one for none kind of society. The road that we're going down here in Pennsylvania, and to a certain degree across the country. But this is one of the things I have to say. One of the bright spots we're kind of looking forward to is that we do have the Democratic National Convention is coming up in Philadelphia, and it looks like that all the drama around any kind of potential floor fight is going to be put to rest tomorrow. Bernie's expected to endorse Hillary on a joint appearance, so we'll see if that happens. I expect it to. But what I'm most interested in what happens outside of that convention hall. I really place the faith in the movements themselves, and frankly, after this horrific week of shootings. I imagine that we're going to see in Philadelphia, you've had strong presence by Black Lives Matter out there. There's going to be tons of Bernie supporters who've been organizing on the ground, are going to be outside that convention hall. There's going to be environmentalists that are organizing a march beginning that Sunday before the Democratic convention. They're going to be there through the week. That's really where I place my hope, is that if we can kind of pull it together and say, listen, we're going to stand up and we're going to say no more. We've got to make sure that's where the energies are, because frankly, I don't think we can afford to trust these people in office to do the right thing. They're going to have their feet held to the fire, and we're going to have to push them.
I mean, that's my fear on a number of fronts, and it's that organizing that has to take place to make sure, as you pointed out, that you hold their feet to the fire. Because one of my concerns on trade, we were just talking about at the top of the hour, right. The idea that the platform hasn't really come out 100% against the TPP. My concern is that Hillary doesn't either.
Oh,
even though she said
trust
she
her
has.
for 1 second when it comes to trade. You have an easy pivot that there's like, okay, she's going to go in there and her negotiator is going to go in there and say that they've got new concessions that are going to have environmental standards just like Obama did. And they
just
can
like
pivot
Bill did.
real easy. The only thing that's going to prevent them from doing so is the reason why the TPP hasn't been signed up until this point, is that people mobilized and they organized against it. That is our only hope.
It'll be interesting to see what happens in the conventions. We're going to be attending both of them, and it's the questions that keep popping up on trade, on jobs, on our communities that I think are so important. Which is why I think going to the Republican convention is so important for us here on the program.
Absolutely. I wish I could be out there in Cleveland for that one too as well. I will be there for the Democratic convention, and I think we're going to spend our time outside the convention hall. We're going to spend our time talking to people who are organizing to see what's on people's mind, because and that's where our reporting is going to be based, because I think we've got to keep the attention on there. And frankly, we need all hands on deck here as far as I'm concerned. And this is why, your reporting out there is going to be so important, why we need kind of progressive, independent media that are going to be putting a spotlight on the social movements and not just the big PR blitzes that we're getting in our politics these days, but focus on the concrete work that's happening in organizing and to make sure that we push this country back in the right direction.
Before I let you go, let me ask you, going back to the budget, the fall's going to be here before we know it. I know that APSCUF does not have a contract yet with the PASHE schools. What are the chances that there's going to be a strike action come the fall?
Well, I tell you, if things don't move, that is a very strong likelihood. And I can tell you, I spent my day today. I got back from vacation last night about 11:30, but I spent my entire day here at the Kutztown University campus doing mobilization work, preparing folks for the event of a strike. We've got an emergency legislative assembly meeting that's going to happen on August 25th, and that's where the faculty representatives from APSCUF will vote whether or not to authorize a strike. And unlike what we've seen in the past years, what's going to happen this time around is that if that strike authorization is a positive vote, and it looks like in all likelihood that it will be, that a strike date will be set. So unless PASHE is going to want to play games, and like they have in the past, if they want to play games, then it doesn't look good for the prospect of an uninterrupted fall semester. And let's hope it does not come to that, but we're preparing for the likelihood.
Yeah, I hope not. But given now that there's a budget in place, what's the likelihood that this continues on any further? Because I guess the argument before was the uncertainty of not having a budget, right?
Well, but now the argument is like, where's the money, right? I mean, there might be a budget, so if they come through and if they come through with the money for this, and they want to kind of support it, that might help relieve some of that pressure, right? If they actually kind of allocate the funds and they come from like a sustainable source, then that might relieve some of that pressure that we can actually kind of negotiate seriously. But the PASHE administrators are also after some fundamental changes in the way that higher education works in this state that we think will have a hugely negative impact on the quality of education and access to public education for students in Pennsylvania. So that doesn't get us out of the woods entirely. Even if the budget is passed, it's really going to depend on whether or not the administrators of the PASHE system are going to want to negotiate for the best interest of all Pennsylvanians, or if they're going to try to play more games to privatize this gem of higher education that we have in this state.
Well, it'll be interesting to see where it goes, Kevin. As it continues, we'd love to have you back and fill us in on the details.
You got it, Rick.
Thanks so much, Kevin Mahoney, Editor Zero, Raging Chicken Press. You want to check out their website? Just go to thericksmithshow.com. Click on Kevin's name. Take you right there. Quick break. Right back.
No doubt you'll be thrilled to learn that we now live and work in a gig economy. That's the latest corporate buzz phrase from Silicon Valley. CEOs are hailing a brave new workplace in which we lucky worker bees no longer have to be stuck in traditional jobs with traditional hours, traditional middle-class pay scales, traditional benefits, traditional job security, and all those other fusty traditionals of the old workplace. In fact, in the gig economy, you don't even get a workplace. Rather, you'll be liberated to work in a series of short-term jobs in many places, always being on call through a mobile app on your iPhone or through a temp agency. How exciting is that? Well, they use exciting in the sense of distressing and nerve-wracking. The gig economy means you're on your own. You're not an employee, but, quote, an independent contractor with no rights and no union. You might have lots of calls to work this week, but there'll be many weeks with no calls. Don't get sick or injured, for no health care or workers' comp are provided. A pension? Your retirement plan is called Adios Chump. This alternative work arrangement is not a futuristic concept. It's already here and spreading fast. Some 16% of U.S. workers are now in this on-call, temporary, part-time, low-pay, you're-on-your-own economy, up from only 10% a decade ago. Corporate chieftains, backed by the economists and politicians they purchase, are creating what they call a workforce of non-employees for one reason: greed. It directly transfers more money and power from workaday families into the coffers of moneyed elites. This is Jim Hightower saying their gig economy is aptly named, for gigs are crude four-hook fishing devices that are drugged by commercial fleets through schools of fish to impale them, haul them in, and cash in on the pain.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
From Rio de Janeiro, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. Mosquito-borne transmission of the Zika virus has just spread to a 62nd country, Guinea-Bissau in West Africa. Mosquito-borne transmission is now ongoing across much of Central and South America, the Caribbean, and parts of East Asia and the Pacific. But what about the United States? The key to catching Zika is a bite from the Aedes aegypti mosquito.
South of, say, Orlando in Florida and south of Houston in Texas, it is responsible for more mosquito bites on humans than any other mosquito species.
Grayson Brown is the director of the University of Kentucky's Public Health Entomology Laboratory. Move north of that Orlando-Houston line, and Brown says the Aedes aegypti mosquito is not thriving.
Only about one mosquito out of every 6,000 that we find in metropolitan areas in this part of Kentucky is Aedes aegypti.
Public health experts in Brazil say Zika is spreading where dengue fever spreads. Dengue has been around for millennia. That should be somewhat of a relief to folks back in the States, where dengue is not a concern. Zika mosquitoes thrive in standing water, particularly indoors, and that's primarily a problem in seriously underdeveloped areas that lack toilets, indoor plumbing, or air conditioning, conditions that push residents outdoors and allow mosquitoes in, and are not very common in the United States.
Our backyards, our suburban areas tend to be more open than they are in Brazil, where every place is all walled off. And of course, people have their windows closed and air conditioning on, and Americans aren't outside as much as Brazilians. So there's a lot of factors going on, both social and biological, that play in favor of being able to better control the Aedes aegypti in North America.
For more global news headlines, visit talkmedianews.com.
Back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. You know, I look at this budget, and look, it's not just Pennsylvania. And the reason I think that talking about the Pennsylvania budget and everything going into that is so important for everyone around the country is it's what's going on all over the place. It's the Republican ideology versus the ideology of the rest of us that, you know, we should have strong schools. We should have strong investment in the public commons, in what is ours. And we used to understand this stuff. You know, I've spent some time, since I am going to the Republican convention in a week, I've spent some time reading through some of their platforms. And you go back to the Eisenhower platform of 56, and it's really a very progressive document. One that talks about providing federal assistance to low-income communities so that you don't have abject poverty. One that talking about protecting Social Security and helping to expand that and make sure it's there. Extending the minimum wage to as many people as possible. Having unemployment benefits that cover more people instead of what we've seen the last several years of how do we make it worse. Really, the idea of strengthening labor laws, really Eisenhower, the platform of that era was talking about how do we undo the negative effects of Taft-Hartley? How do we undo that insanity and get reforms in place that strengthen collective bargaining? You can't get this stuff through past the Republican Party today. And the idea of making sure that there's access to equal pay regardless of sex, that was in the 56 platform. I look at 12 and what's coming out of 16. This is not the Republican Party of old. And I talk to a lot of people, my grandfather was Republican, so I'm going to be a Republican too. But they're not the same party. Your grandfather wouldn't be this Republican. Like I wouldn't have been a Democrat back in the 1890s. Wouldn't have happened. Things change. And as in the coming days, the platform information keeps coming out, and I'm trying to get my hands on what is each of the platforms, because I think they're important. They're the declaration of principles, of priorities, of morality. To me, once you get your hands on that, you can begin having the conversations about what's really important. Now, I understand they're not the candidates' positions. It's not the candidate declaring that. It's the party. It's what a Republican Party stands for. And understand that most people who pledged to the party, they buy into the platform. That's why I think it's important to talk about that. Anyway, I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, talk a little bit about education, what's going on. Big march over the weekend. We'll get to some of that. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. Philando Castile, the black man shot to death by police in Minnesota, was a member of Teamsters Local 320 in Minneapolis. In the wake of protests against his killing and the horrific killings of police officers in Dallas, Teamsters Local 320 President Sammy Gabriel told Workers Independent News that the local is feeling the terrible loss of Philando and plans to be involved in helping to support his family.
It's a tragedy to have one of our Teamster members who's been with us as a Teamster since 2002. Phil was a gentle soul, well-respected, nutrition service supervisor, was well-respected by the staff that he supervised every day and by the kids and staff that he fed breakfast and lunch to every day. It's truly heart-wrenching.
Gabriel says that Local 320 also represents some law enforcement officers in Minnesota, though not the one who shot and killed Castile.
We have a lot of law enforcement. This is equally heart-wrenching for those members that see these acts of violence. And, of course, Dallas rips your heart out, and you feel for your brother officers that are going on the street every day, even with what's happening, continue to go out and do their job day after day.
This is Mitch Lawrence with the Sports Minute for Workers Independent News. Kevin Durant wants to win an NBA championship so badly, he's willing to go to the Golden State Warriors to get one. That's what's known as taking the easy way out, because in the last 2 seasons alone, the Warriors have won a title, reached the finals twice, and already have one of the game's premier players in Stephen Curry, their 2-time MVP. If that's not taking the easy road to a title, then I don't know what is. But Kevin Durant doesn't want to admit the obvious, so he's gotten himself into a lot of trouble with what he said since he's left the Oklahoma City Thunder. He used a basic philosophy. If you can't beat them, join them. But in doing so, Durant has insulted all basketball fans with his claim that winning with the Warriors is the hardest road to take. In explaining his decision, he actually said, quote, "I don't know anybody here," unquote. "Please spare us." Durant knows everyone on his new team, starting with Draymond Green. He and the Warriors' bad boy conducted a season-long conversation via text messages. It was in those messages that Green did a lot of the recruiting. If that doesn't sound quite kosher, well, it's not illegal by NBA rules, but the optics are bad. It certainly doesn't look good that while he was supposed to be trying to beat the Warriors, he was actually engaged in conversations with their players. And now Kevin Durant's taking the easy way out. He'll never admit it. That's all you need to know about the newest Golden State Warrior.
Brought to you by the IBEW, 750,000 men and women powering the way for an American comeback. Information on how to become an International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Power Professional is online at ibew.org.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Bringing sanity and rational thought back to America. Rick Smith.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So over the weekend, lots of education stuff going on in Washington, D.C. The NEA had their big get-together, but also the Badass Teachers Association had their conference and march in D.C. to talk about social justice, talk about better schools, education for all. Here to talk a little bit about the weekend's events, I got Michael Flanagan. He is the Badass Teachers Association's Action Committee chairperson. Michael, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, thank you very much for having us on.
So what took you to Washington, D.C. this past weekend?
Well, I'm a member of BATS, as you just said, and BATS, largely through Marla Kilfoyle, our executive director, had been working with a coalition from the Save Our Schools organization with National Public Education, NPE, United Opt Out, and groups of other members, largely grassroots activist organizations like Journey for Justice, and they had assembled a rally at the Lincoln Memorial and then a march to the White House for education issues and social justice issues. So the members of these groups had been working for 9 months. People like Dr. Denisha Jones, who's coming on your show in a little while after me, and Bob George and other people Jesse Turner had organized this event, recruited people from Detroit, Chicago, New Jersey, Tennessee, California, Oregon, Washington, Florida. I mean, I could go on to assemble and have our voices heard through this grassroots organization. So we had a pre-rally at the Lincoln Memorial, which I was lucky enough to be able to play guitar and sing for with my colleagues and friends in BATS. And then we had the pre-rally was excellent anyway. I mean, that could have been the whole day for me. Then we had the rally where we had speakers like, and in no particular order, Uhuru Williams and Gus Morales and Reverend Barber and Bishop Selders and especially for me, Ashawn Johnson, the 12-year-old activist from Chicago, just bringing reality of social justice and problems in education. And especially on a day after the murders of police officers in Dallas and 3 days after the shootings of unarmed black men at Baton Rouge and in Minnesota, it was a powerful day to be at the Lincoln Memorial and marching on the White House, fighting for our students and speaking out about Black Lives Matters and teachers and public schools. It was a phenomenal day.
It sounds, and as I understand, you had a pretty good turnout as well.
Yes, it was, depending on when I was counting, it was 500 to at least 1,000 people. It was kind of hard to count while you were either at the stage or in front of the stage because it was a very, very hot day. and a lot of the participants and the people who came, some from Chicago and Detroit on buses, were spread out along the mall, seeking shade. So we would kind of take turns and stand in front of the stage or on the steps, and then after a while we would have to go hit the shade for a while. But during the march, you could clearly see the numbers, and I'm estimating at the march it was between 700 to 1,000 people.
That's an excellent turnout.
But I never counted.
I mean, that's an excellent turnout for a grassroots group of people who are paying their own way. Because as I remember, they were taking donations to try and get folks there, because it's basically dig into your own pockets.
Yes, I mean, for the people, like I was a performer, and most of the speakers I know, we all paid out of pocket. During the fundraising, we ran, fundraisers through each group involved. Like, I'm a member of BATS. We threw in money that we raised through our own membership, and each group that sponsored the event had to come up with money. And now that you mention it, there are some people who were not involved in the event that are sitting there questioning the fact that we the organization, the coalition, and I'll say we, I was a member of it. I wasn't an organizer, but I was a member. We accepted funds from AFT and NEA. We accepted a bus from the UFT, and people are trying to say that that the AFT and the NEA were, I don't know, somehow sponsoring this event. So anyone who says that, I just like to be out here in front saying I took my union dues from the AFT, and I made sure we requested it to use it to something that we wanted as a grassroots organization. There were no speakers that were not recruited by the organizers. And we've just been trying to set that issue straight today, now that you mention it.
Right. I mean, it's important to know that it's a grassroots group and it's not being co-opted, because some people are going to fear that the message will somehow be co-opted.
Absolutely, and as do we. But like, I was there. I know who organized it. There was no, I call them hacks. There were no hacks that stepped up forward. Everyone who spoke and everyone who volunteered and everyone who performed and organized was grassroots, paying their own ticket, and you'd be hard pressed to find somebody who was not happy to be there. And the conference the following day at Howard University, which was in and of its own self amazing.
So what out of this, what sounds like an amazing event, what out of this do you hope that comes? Was this an opportunity to network and kind of solidify the base? Was this an outreach for the White House or some political gain? What were you looking to accomplish?
I mean, all of the above. It was indeed outreach, because the majority of the people who organized and spoke, they're in different groups that we've been working with all along, but largely through social media. So you'll know them through Facebook or Twitter or whichever groups that you're a member of. So the whole meeting each other in a place like Washington, as BATS has been involved in for a couple of years, and SOS for years before that, solidifies friendships, it networks, and makes working easier and organizing easier with the different groups. Also, the focus of this march was social justice, and we had warriors like the Diet Hunger Strikers and Journey for Justice and the New York Student Union and the Dreamers. It was amazing to see the diversity and just the hardcore activists. Like, everybody that spoke was a hero of mine, and to be able to interact with them and to listen to them was amazing, in its own right. And also to call attention and, look, we're not going to get mainstream media coverage, but to stand on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and to be able to speak truth and to march and rally and sing and look, if you're not out there banging drums and speaking out, then no one will ever hear you.
Yep.
So, in a day like that day, Friday, after the tragedies of that week, we were there to reinforce that no matter what has happened, we still need justice and we still need an education that benefits the poorest and most, oppressed among us, and we'll stand with them as family and as organization. So, and plus we're leaning on educators, we're leaning on legislators, we're leaning on union members, anyone, you know what I mean? It's just a good way to coalesce and get the message out, and then just to reward yourself. Because there were celebrations during, we would have little get-togethers afterwards where we could just, blow off steam and make connections that will last us for years to come, hopefully.
And hopefully begin to to hone that message a little better, to where then it becomes something that mainstream media has to cover, something that they have to pursue, and that maybe we get to push to the front of the stage, talking about how do we make sure that every child gets a good quality education, regardless of their zip code, regardless of where they were born.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I won't belabor the point, but like my personal favorite part of the day was Ashawn Johnson's sort of impromptu speech in the midst of such powerful, dedicated speakers all day long. His just stood out to me because he basically came up there and he's at the ripe old age of 12 years old. This is the second time he's speaking at the Lincoln Memorial. And if you believe nothing anyone else said in that entire day, there was no way to deny the truth in what he said. And basically, in the midst of his discussing the closing of schools in Chicago, and he literally broke down and said he didn't know if he could make it past the age he was at, and as Brother G2 said it at the Howard keynote speech the next day, he does not know if his tomorrow's going to come. And if that does not grab anyone, I challenge him to watch that speech and not, get up off the couch and join this movement or whatever movement that you feel that you can contribute to.
Is there a place to see these speeches?
Yes, YouTube. We're posting on. I will get them posted to your show through Steven Singer, who has always been so good to coordinate us. And yeah, the live stream is out there. The pictures and videos of the march and everything, mostly through the Bats page is where I'm getting info, but we're trying to share it everywhere. So we're not going to be shy. I just thought this. And I'm a huge fan of him. He's my hero. I was lucky enough to tell his mom that. And, it was my favorite part in a day of power and truth.
Right. But, at the end of this, Michael, the fact that, you've got a 12-year-old saying, I don't know if my tomorrow, if this is going to be my last day, that should be something as a nation that we take to heart.
Absolutely. It's like Brother Chitu said. He said, that was not a joke. He's in fear for his tomorrow. He's 12 years old and a world-class speaker and activist. And I work with a lot of activists, and I'm friends with many of them. And this young man's speech just made the day for me. As important as anything that happened that weekend for me personally, but I'm sure I'm not the only one.
So last line of questioning I've got for you. Now that you've had the rally, the conference, you've had all of this, what I'll qualify as success. Where does this go from today forward?
Back to the trenches. Back to the trenches. Every group has their own objectives. United Opt Out is working on people throughout the country to opt out of the standardized testing. NPE is bringing issues to the forefront and giving forums for real education. I'll call them warriors. To me, they're warriors to have a forum to speak. And, we're in Bats, we're trying to push for a conference with the White House to bring education issues. We're trying to, I personally am working with a group called the Momocrats I know it's really weird that I'm associated with them, but they obtained credentials for the DNC, so I'll be going there to try to recruit delegates at the DNC to speak about education and social justice issues. At the conferences, we learn techniques and skills to organize and to use social media and to address special education issues and, the techniques of the hunger strike. It was just like I said, it was a beautiful couple of days where people from all over the country, from all, representative of every social, economic group, and just getting together and sharing it and telling truth and working with each other. And like I said, and I'll push it again because I've been hearing the naysayers trying to make it sound like it was some AFT-NEA sponsored event, and for whatever my word's worth, I'll tell you right now, this was grassroots, and, I'll tell anybody to their face what the deal was. This was truth to power on a grand scale, and I am so proud to have been there, worked with the organizers, and had the opportunity to play, to contribute something to this march.
Well, it sounds like great stuff, Michael, and I appreciate you sharing a little bit of your experience with us, and I look forward to the next one and having folks come and explain and talk about that as well. Michael, thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, Rick. Thank you very much for having us on and letting us talk about this.
Terrific talking to you again, Michael Flanagan. He is on the Badass Teachers Association's Action Committee. He is their chairperson. You want to check out their website? We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on Michael's name. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1968. That was the day that the American Indian movement began at a meeting in Minneapolis, Minnesota. A group of 200 Native Americans gathered together to discuss a response to the U.S. government's history of broken treaties and the devastating consequences on Native peoples. The statistics of unyielding poverty and high unemployment in Native communities were staggering. By 1970, 40% of the Native population lived in poverty. The unemployment rate was 10 times the national average. Life expectancy was only 44 years old. In the early 1970s, activists staged a series of occupations at Alcatraz, Wounded Knee, and at Mount Rushmore. Mount Rushmore is built on a site in the Black Hills that is sacred to the Oceti-Sakowin, or the Great Sioux Nation. The United States government promised Native rights to the land in a treaty that was broken when gold was discovered. In 1972, activists staged a Trail of Broken Treaties caravan, which ended in a 6-day occupation of the Bureau of Indian Affairs offices in Washington, D.C. They issued a statement that read, quote, "We seek a new American majority, a majority that is not content merely to confirm itself by superiority of numbers, but which conscience is committed toward prevailing upon the public will in ceasing wrongs and doing right." Beginning in the 1970s, the United States government began to respond to Native people's demands. A series of federal acts gave Native communities more control over their education and improving their health care. Lawsuits brought by tribes resulted in further economic autonomy. Yet by 2014, 1 in 4 Native people still lived in poverty. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Coleman Lowndes. Following the ambush of police officers during a peaceful Black Lives Matter protest in Dallas, Fox News figures blamed President Obama for speaking out against the recent police killings of 2 black men. Listen to Fox News contributor Kevin Jackson on Fox and Friends.
Barack Obama's speech help to stoke this. I know people don't like to hear this, but we are not having an honest conversation around why this type of thing is occurring.
And Milwaukee County Sheriff and Fox regular David Clark on Fox and Friends.
But going back to President Obama, he's armed with powerful words, and he uses those words irresponsibly. It fuels this sort of anger toward the American police officer, and I wish he'd knock it off.
Despite Fox's attempt to point the finger at Obama, in his speech, the president acknowledged that the problem of disparate police force, quote, in no way contradicts our respect and appreciation for the vast majority of police officers. And following the Dallas shooting, the president stated that there was no possible justification for such a vicious, calculated, and despicable attack on law enforcement. For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happy!
Where family values are more than slogans. The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So the Philly Voice is reporting. You look at our budget here in Pennsylvania, and they're talking about historic investments in education. We're spending more money. What the Philly Voice has pointed out is that Pennsylvania, along with New Jersey, each state spends less on higher education than they spend on prisons. A new U.S. Department of Education survey out now. They're saying that this is emblematic of a trend across most of the states in the country, and that when comparing the monies appropriated for prisons to the monies budgeted for public state colleges, well, we know who wins out. Statistics show that during the last 30 years, state and local government expenditures for corrections have skyrocketed 3 times as fast as the money spent on elementary and secondary education. Are we surprised by this? The answer is no. We're spending tons of money in the for-profit private prison world, and not surprising. According to the study, this increase in correction spending has been driven by, among other factors, an increase in the number of people incarcerated in prisons and jails. They point out that the United States has only 5% of the world's population, but more than 20% of the world's incarcerated population. Think about that for a second, because we're the land of the free, right? Not so much. Again, it goes back to what we talked about earlier, to these zero tolerance policies, especially for minor stuff. And also the policies that lock people up for, in debtor's prison, basically, because they can't pay the parking ticket or the fine that they get for one of these minor crimes. So, again, not surprising to me. It points out that a person with less education is more likely to end up in prison. Researchers note that 2/3 of the state prison inmates in the U.S. did not graduate from high school. So again, you go back to some of the studies that we know, some of the stuff that we know without fail. You don't finish high school, chances are you are not going to lead a middle-class life, which means you're going to struggle at the bottom, and some of those no-tolerance policies, those zero-tolerance policies, will jump up and bite you in the behind. In fact, reading scores, we've seen studies on that predict the amount of kids going in second grade, the amount of kids who, on standardized tests, who fail reading tests, the percentage of them going on to prison is scary stuff. Now, the Philly Voice points out that in the U.S., you've got 2/3 of these inmates who didn't graduate from high school in the U.S. They estimate that 10% increase in high school graduation rates could lead to a 9% decline in the country's arrest rate. They point out that both New Jersey and Pennsylvania a lot more money for primary education than prisons and jails, but the increase in spending outpaces the growth in schools. And you think about this and you go, where are our priorities? If you remember the story from Philadelphia last year, where they cut a couple $100 million over the last couple of years in education funding, yet built a $400 million prison. You go, wouldn't it be better to, instead of pay for $40,000, $50,000 a year to lock someone up, I don't know, to pay $20,000, $30,000 a year to educate them? Just kind of a thought. They go on to point out that Pennsylvania has seen a prison spending increase of 320%, going from 1980 up to 2013. 320% increase in the amount we spend on prisons, as opposed to a 74% increase in public education spending. New Jersey, their public education a little bit better, spent an increase of 134% over that time period. Corrections rose 282%. The national average for education, 107%, while the funding for state and local prisons more than tripled, 324%. They point out that a total of 24 states had per capita spending rates more than 100 percentage points higher than the per student rate of primary education spending. Pennsylvania was among one of those states. Again, comes back to priorities, comes back to public policy, comes back to the commitment to education, the commitment to community, and not just punitive locking people up, and especially people who are poor. That's my problem with a lot of our criminal justice system. But here you go. Not anybody surprised by it? You shouldn't be. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk with Denisha Jones. She is one of the Badass Teacher Association board members. Talk a little bit more about the big rally that was, the ideas going forward, and how we can make the changes. Let's take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show.
Should not breathe near it. Do not let pets or kids near it.
Toxic algae bloom in Florida ruins 4th of July for tourism-based businesses. U.S. Senate moves fast to nix Vermont's GMO labeling law. Royalty reform for big coal on public lands. Oakland City Council bans coal export terminal. Plus,
Juno, welcome to Jupiter.
Solar-powered NASA spacecraft reaches orbit around Jupiter.
All of those stories and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Now, Bill says that the conversation with Attorney General Lynch was very innocent. It was just about grandkids and the weather and how neither will exist if Trump is elected.
Man, this is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, we missed a day this week, so we probably missed a lot of green news. So I'll shut up and let you get on with it.
Well, first, as we go to air, the U.S. Senate is rushing legislation to create a national labeling standard for genetically modified ingredients, or GMOs, in food.
That's good.
This bill, however, preempts a new Vermont state law. It's widely supported by consumers that require small labels on products with GMO ingredients. But this new bipartisan Senate bill would cancel Vermont's law and all other state labeling standards to allow manufacturers instead to use a graphic QR code, which can only be read by smartphones.
So it doesn't actually help the consumer know what's in it?
That's right.
Unless they have a smartphone.
And bother to look it up.
Oh, brother.
In southern Florida, a massive toxic algae bloom along the coast ruined the crucial 4th of July weekend for tourism-based businesses and residents. Governor Rick Scott has declared a state of emergency across 4 Florida counties because the thick mat of toxic algae is not only putrid, it is also dangerous. On visiting the toxic algae bloom, Florida Senator Marco Rubio apparently was hoping for easy answers.
If there was one way to solve this, if we could prove that there was one measure or one industry or one group that is responsible for this, we would do it. I mean, this hurts everybody. Who benefits from this?
Well, it turns out there are multiple causes, beginning with the destruction of part of the Everglades and its natural flood control services, converting it into industrial farms that send unregulated fertilizer and manure runoff into heavily polluted Lake Okeechobee. That feeds the algae bloom, but now climate change brings more frequent deluges. So the Army Corps of Engineers must release water from the lake so its levees don't break. That dumps the toxic algae along the coast, where it thrives in water heated by global warming.
That is a lot of causes that Marco Rubio clearly doesn't want to do anything about. Here's what he said to one of the local news outlets, and I love the way the reporter responded here.
It can't just be driven by the politics of it. It has to be driven by the science of what's going to get us to a solution.
I actually spoke with a scientist this week who is trying to do the exact research that Rubio was referring to earlier today. The only thing holding him back, he said, is getting funding from the federal government.
Oh, man, Rubio slam.
Big coal reform. The Obama administration has closed a loophole in regulations that allowed coal companies to legally cheat the public out of royalties from coal mined on public lands. Royalties were based on a percentage of the price of the coal at the first sale. So the biggest coal companies got around that by selling the public's coal to their own subsidiaries first at below market rates with below market royalties. And then would sell it again later at a much higher price.
Wow.
Last week, the Interior Department put a stop to that practice, part of a major review of the federal coal leasing program.
Wow, what a scam. How long were they getting away with that?
Decades.
Unbelievable.
A new study in the European Union calculates that coal dust generated from coal-fired power plants kills 23,000 people a year in Europe because tiny particles of dust pollution can lodge deep in the lungs, causing heart disease and lung cancer. Coal dust pollution was the primary reason one San Francisco Bay Area city just said no to a developer's controversial proposal to build a new coal export shipping terminal to ship coal to China. The Oakland City Council voted unanimously last week to ban all storage and handling of coal in the city and the Port of Oakland, citing high levels of coal dust pollution from coal trains. That effectively halts the project for now. Finally, NASA's Juno spacecraft, after a 5-year journey from Earth, successfully entered orbit around Jupiter on July 4th. It also broke a distance record. It's the first spacecraft ever to travel so far out into the outer solar system, powered only by solar energy. Juno has a massive array of advanced solar panels and super energy-efficient instruments for its 2-year orbital mission around Jupiter.
So a solar craft has made it all the way to Jupiter?
Yep.
And you're impressed with that Solar Impulse 2 airplane? It's barely made it around the world.
It's all pretty cool to me.
For much more on all of these cool stories, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Don't forget, you can find us and follow us on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Limitless undying love which shines around me like a million suns. It calls me on and on across the universe.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
We need to stand united, for undivided we shall never fall. Remember all, we need to trust in and then forever call on our brothers and our sisters. And are you and I are win? You and I both know that we can rely on it. The time is prime, planets aligning, no mistaking. For union resurrection, the anger has awakened. The sleeping giant, come on, yeah, we can do it. We need to revive, re-amp, and re-up the labor movement.
So is anybody surprised with the numbers put out by the Department of Education saying that from 1979 through 2013, primary education spending grew by 74%, while prison spending grew by 320% here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Anyone surprised by that? Anyone surprised by the fact that nationally primary education has gone up 107%, while the prison funding budget, the for-profit in-their-pocket prison budget, has gone up by 324%? Anybody surprised by that? I'm not. And this is why we're seeing teachers and parents and students in the streets. It's priorities. And that's why I'm thrilled to have Denisha Jones back on the program to talk about the weekend's conference and rally there in Washington, D.C. Denisha, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me, Rick.
So, I look at these numbers, and when you see them, they're staring you in the face. It's staggering, but not surprising.
Absolutely. No, I'm not surprised. I'm shocked. It's dismaying, but as you know, it's not a surprise. We know that we're investing in the wrong priorities in this country, and that leads to such outrageous numbers. We shouldn't be settling for it. We should be outraged, but surprise is not one of the things we should be feeling. But worried and scared about what this means for our future. Definitely what we should be feeling.
And, it makes me go, what if our priorities were different? What if we said, we're going to take that money and invest it in education, invested in educating people who may have gotten in trouble so that maybe they don't do it again? Maybe, it just seems that we're heading down the wrong path.
I think we definitely are. I mean, I guess you make a bigger profit when you lock people up and get paid to lock them up than you do to educate and rehabilitate them. But profit shouldn't be the main goal. It should be about a better sustaining society for us all. And we're never going to get that if we just increase the number of people we lock up and how much we charge to lock them up. We only get that we invest in early childhood education and regular education and college and mental health, and it's all of the basic things people need to be productive members of our society.
Now, I mean, I looked at in this Department of Education report, a staggering thing jumped out at me. Here in the home of the free, the land of the free, the home of the brave, we are only 5% of the global population, yet we lock up 20% of the world's incarcerated population. That is the staggering part of it to me.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty staggering, and I've been reading. I'm in law school part-time, so I'm learning a lot about our criminal justice system, which is very frightening, and reading stuff about the policies that kind of lead to that. And it is pretty scary because it just shows you that, we'd rather, incarcerate people than to help them to make sure that they can, do well and get a job and survive. And so you look at other countries and they just don't have that kind of investment in incarceration, and so it's really scary to wonder what will those numbers be in 10, 20 years from now. We're going to just continue to lock people up. It just makes you worry about the future, and there's a direct connection to education because we know that people who are in the private prison industry can base their numbers off of reading statistics for black boys in certain cities in third grade. They can know how many beds they're going to need because if they're not reading in third grade, the chances that they're going to graduate high school and get a job are even less, but they're going to have a place waiting for them, and that's in the prison system. And that's part of what the conference was about, exploring what can we do about the school-to-prison pipeline, how can we put a stop to that so that we're not funding the prison industrial complex to the levels that we are now.
Yeah, I mean, again, it comes back down to the kind of work that you're doing. And from what I hear, you had a fantastic turnout and a good rally. Can you tell me a little bit about, from your perspective, what you saw this weekend?
Yeah, we did have a really good event. I think, numbers-wise, it's different than it was 5 years ago. 5 years ago, we have to remember that in 2011, Governor Walker started his attack on unions in the state of Wisconsin, and so that fueled a lot more people coming to the event in 2011. But this time, what we really had, and I've been going to every education-based rally in D.C. since I came back in 2011 until now. This was by far the most diverse one, and that's one of the things we're really proud of. We had a commitment to social justice, so that meant a commitment to bringing people who are most affected by what we're seeing, which are black and brown communities, and making sure that they can get there. Well, it's not easy to get to D.C. when you live in places like Massachusetts and Philadelphia and New York, and so one of the things we did was work really hard to have that representation. So Journey for Justice Alliance is one of the groups that we really wanted to be a part of this event, not just to have their executive director, Brother G2 Brown, speak, but to have their members come and be a part of this and to give workshop presentations and to talk. And so we saw that this time they really did come, and we worked hard to raise the money from local unions and national unions to pay for the buses that would get them there. Not just the buses, but the hotel, the cost of the conference and everything. So in that way, it was a hugely successful event. We've been saying for years that we need to be more diverse in the people we represent. This year we got the diversity numbers. Now we really start to have to diversify what we're talking about, because we got to make sure that the issues we're looking at are those that are affecting these communities as well, too. And I think we're definitely, and the conference really gave light to that, and we're definitely moving into that direction.
Yeah, I mean, these conferences are important because of the education that they provide. And you go back throughout, the history of social justice movements. I remember a couple years ago, we had done our labor history tour and ended up at the Highlander Center in just outside of Knoxville, Tennessee. And you talk about, the growth of the civil rights movement, the labor movement. All of those came with beginnings of having these educational moments, these training sessions, these how do we organize? How do we bring in people whose names will be forgotten by history, but they're the ones who do the real hard work of organizing?
Absolutely. I mean, and we had grandparents and parents who, are telling us how the closing of the schools is a hate crime in their community. When you close a school in a low-income community, you devastate that community and you impact real harm on the children there. And to listen to a grandmother of 5 or a mother of 6 tell us these stories, and it really just gave us some perspective. I mean, we are fighting for a lot of things, but we have to remember some of this is life and death to the people that it's affecting, right? Right. And so we have to keep that perspective in mind, and how can we broaden our fight in education to include those people? And I think that's one of the most successful things that we've gotten out of this. We're looking at issues of racism, systematic oppression, classism, xenophobia, all of them, tackling them straight on. Instead of saying they're not an education issue, we're seeing how they impact the education issue. So Black Lives Matter, it came up a lot, but so does Black Education Matter, and diversifying the teachers and making sure that, students see teachers who look like them in the classroom. So it was definitely a broad range of issues addressed, whether through the rally speakers or through the conference presenters, and that's one of the really big takeaways of that. We're seeing that the movement needs to diversify if we're going to kind of win the battles that we're involved in.
And I would argue poverty matters. I mean, I grew up as a kid, in the 1970s in a high poverty, my majority minority community where they did just that. They closed the local public school down. They closed the Purtis Elementary School, demolished it. They didn't even leave the relic of a building to remind you. And I remember the hole in the community that left, because in the summer times, kids used to go there for activities. They had a lunch program where kids could go and get a hot meal, for many the only hot meal they would get. And when they ripped that out of the community, it left a giant hole. And I can't imagine today what that would do in that same community.
Yeah, it was definitely an issue. And yes, you're right. Poverty is one of the biggest issues that we're facing. And we've been trying to, since 5 years ago when Save Our Schools First organized, to really tell people that poverty does matter. I mean, a lot of people like to say, well, zip code shouldn't be your destiny, and it's not. But we're saying it's really hard to educate a child who comes to school and they don't have stable housing and they're food insecure and they don't have health care. You're making our job even harder. And so, if we could just mitigate the effects that poverty does to education, then we would see a lot of things happening in schools where people can get around the poverty that they're brought into. I was born into poverty too, but fortunately there were programs back in the day that I took advantage of to get me, where I am today, being a professor and being able to go to law school and these things. But those programs aren't available for kids these days. They're not there. There's a lot of big cutbacks on them. So again, like you said, it's about the priorities and what we're willing to invest in.
And it's the money and it's the budgets and all of those things. But when you start talking to people, because most of my friends don't realize that the schools in high poverty communities are any different than the schools in other neighborhoods, that they think everything's the same everywhere, when the reality is those schools in higher poverty communities have homelessness problems, have severe dysfunctional home problems. As you pointed out, no meals for kids. There are a lot of additional problems outside of what just happens in the classroom.
Yeah, there are, and that's the difference, between looking at funding based on equality and equity. And in an equality system, you're going to give that district with the 90% students on free and reduced lunch the same amount of money as the district that only has 10% students on free and reduced lunch. But in an equity situation, you're going to say, well, the place with 90% free and reduced lunch, they need more. Their students just have greater needs for the school to fill, whether it's housing and transportation and making sure. A lot of schools have to send children home with food on a Friday to cover the weekend because they've realized that schools are the only place they're going to get their meals. And so what then happens over the weekend? And so they're investing in sending these kids home, and it's still not enough, right? So we got to look at these in the equity system. What can we do to make sure that the students in need are getting what they need? And it's not always equitable, and people have to accept that. I think it's very hard in this country. We've been made to believe that, it's not fair fair to give a little bit more to someone who needs it. And I don't know where that kind of thinking comes from, because that's how you secure your society. You make sure that there's a safety net there in place. And school used to be that place, that great equalizer where, everyone could get a good education and have a fair chance. But we're seeing that's not the same, because the needs of some are so great, and we're not willing to step out and say, yes, we need to pay more attention here because they need, they have greater needs at this time.
So last line of questioning I've got for you, coming out of this conference, as I've said, that it sounded like it was wildly successful. You had fantastic speakers, and there are videos that folks can take a look at, and we'll make sure we get links at thericksmithshow.com. What do you hope comes out of this? What's the next step in furthering your goals?
Well, one of the things we did on Sunday, we ended with a smaller group of folks to really talk about the idea of building a coalition, because we framed a coalition loosely to get this event going. So there was about 8 or 9, 10 groups that were part of the coalition, but that's what our only goal was this event. So we haven't looked past that. And so many of us are involved in our own groups. The Badass Teachers was represented, United Opt Out, Save Our Schools, other groups as well, different local union groups are represented. But how can we, or should we form a coalition that then sustains the work that each of these groups are doing? And so that was one of the things I think that we're going to look at for the next step. So we got ideas from people about what it would mean to be in a coalition, what would you want from the coalition, how would we work, together and support each other and not overstep, because, that always plays an issue as well, too. And then, so we're going to go from there. And we got a lot of great feedback on what people would like, and just a way to support as many people as possible.
Well, it will be interesting to see where this goes, and I look forward to having you come back and give us an update on how things are going post conference and rally. But again, I heard it was a fantastic success, and I wish you guys the best.
Yeah, thank you. It was a very great time. So we're hoping, that's next time we'll keep it going. We're not sure when we'll come back, but hopefully it'll be soon.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Denisha.
Right. Thank you.
Denisha Jones, educator and Badass Teachers board member. Again, if you want more information, we've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For working people, come to talk.
I got a picture in my pocket of the lucky one. I'll announce the winner on the radio. With my microphone, I do a super show. I wear a cowboy hat. It is my business hat. I'm on till 1 a.m. I must tell you that I'm a man with a mission.
The Rick Smith Show, changing America for the better.
No doubt you'll be thrilled to learn that we now live and work in a gig economy. That's the latest corporate buzz phrase from Silicon Valley. CEOs are hailing a brave new workplace in which we lucky worker bees no longer have to be stuck in traditional jobs with traditional hours, traditional middle-class pay scales, traditional benefits, traditional job security, and all those other fusty traditionals of the old workplace. In fact, in the gig economy, you don't even get a workplace. Rather, you'll be liberated to work in a series of short-term jobs in many places, always being on call through a mobile app on your iPhone or through a temp agency. How exciting is that? Well, they use exciting in the sense of distressing and nerve-wracking. The gig economy means you're on your own. You're not an employee, but, quote, an independent contractor with no rights and no union. You might have lots of calls to work this week, but there'll be many weeks with no calls. Don't get sick or injured, for no health care or workers' comp are provided. A pension? Your retirement plan is called Adios Chump. This alternative work arrangement is not a futuristic concept. It's already here and spreading fast. Some 16% of U.S. workers are now in this on-call, temporary, part-time, low-pay, you're-on-your-own economy, up from only 10% a decade ago. Corporate chieftains, backed by the economists and politicians they purchase, are creating what they call a workforce of non-employees for one reason: greed. It directly transfers more money and power from workaday families into the coffers of moneyed elites. This is Jim Hightower saying their gig economy is aptly named, for gigs are crude four-hook fishing devices that are drugged by commercial fleets through schools of fish to impale them, haul them in, and cash in on the pain.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
From Rio de Janeiro, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. Mosquito-borne transmission of the Zika virus has just spread to a 62nd country, Guinea-Bissau in West Africa. Mosquito-borne transmission is now ongoing across much of Central and South America, the Caribbean, and parts of East Asia and the Pacific. But what about the United States? The key to catching Zika is a bite from the Aedes aegypti mosquito.
South of, say, Orlando in Florida and south of Houston in Texas, it is responsible for more mosquito bites on humans than any other mosquito species.
Grayson Brown is the director of the University of Kentucky's Public Health Entomology Laboratory. Move north of that Orlando-Houston line, and Brown says the Aedes aegypti mosquito is not thriving.
Only about one mosquito out of every 6,000 that we find in metropolitan areas in this part of Kentucky is Aedes aegypti.
Public health experts in Brazil say Zika is spreading where dengue fever spreads. Dengue has been around for millennia. That should be somewhat of a relief to folks back in the States, where dengue is not a concern. Zika mosquitoes thrive in standing water, particularly indoors, and that's primarily a problem in seriously underdeveloped areas that lack toilets, indoor plumbing, or air conditioning, conditions that push residents outdoors and allow mosquitoes in, and are not very common in the United States.
Our backyards, our suburban areas tend to be more open than they are in Brazil, where every place is all walled off. And of course, people have their windows closed and air conditioning on, and Americans aren't outside as much as Brazilians. So there's a lot of factors going on, both social and biological, that play in favor of being able to better control the Aedes aegypti in North America.
For more global news headlines, visit TalkMediaNews.com.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Some really good news coming out of the National Labor Relations Board. A 3-1 decision by the NLRB. And look, I mean, this is one of, in my view, the good things that Obama has done by appointing a worker-centric, a worker-friendly National Labor Relations Board, someone who's going to promote the ideals of the National Labor Relations Act, which is to promote the idea of collective bargaining, to promote the idea of labor management cooperation, labor peace, the idea of getting people to a table, sitting down, negotiating, and hammering out an agreement, not using the NLRB as a bludgeon to deny workers the right to organize, not using the NLRB as a stick to beat workers over the head. Nope, about actually promoting the idea of collective bargaining. Well, today it has come out that they ruled 3-1 to return to the MB Sturgis Incorporated ruling, the Sturgis standard, if you will, and reverse the Oakwood Care Center decision, referred to as the Oakwood decision. Now, you go, well, but what is all of that? Why this is important is under the Sturgis ruling that came during the Clinton era, if you have an employer who has regular employees and they use temporary staffing folks, who understand most temporary staffing positions are really permanent until you just want to get rid of them, and a way to make sure that your permanent and regular employees don't start asking for too much, because you go, hey, we can just replace you, and so that they don't go on strike. The idea is to keep a divided workplace so that you can pit them against one another and lower wages, hours, conditions, and all of that stuff. That's the mentality. That may not have started that way, but that's what it's turned into. So what the Oakwood decision said was, well, if you want to, you bad unions, if you want to organize a workforce of regular and temporary employees, you have to go to all of the employers and ask their consent. You got to ask for their permission. Yeah, I mean, come on, it's laughable. I mean, it really is that was actually the decision the Bush era NLRB came up with. The idea that you're going to go to the staffing agency and go, can we organize your employees? Yeah, that's going to happen. What this now does is it returns to this decision now returns us to the Sturgis standard, which is, you can organize them and you don't have to beg for consent. You don't have to ask for permission. You don't have to go with hat in hand and go, oh, please, can we? Mother, may I? No, you just, if the workers vote for a union, that's what happens. And why is that important? Well, a couple of reasons, I think. First, maybe you begin to push back on the assault on workers' rights to organize. And part of that being having the divided workforce. If now everyone's in the same bargaining unit, in the same contract, under the same rules, you can no longer divide them. And then maybe you begin pushing for more permanent, full-time, regular employees and get rid of this temp model. Seems reasonable, rational, and thoughtful to me. But here again, this is one of those moments where you go, this is where having a Democrat in the White House is important, because regulatory bodies like the NLRB, they have the ability to make solid pro-NLRA decisions. Understand, the National Labor Relations Act, the original act had nothing given to employers. It was all about promoting collective bargaining and giving workers some say and some strength at the bargaining table. And I say we need to be going back to the original intent of that act. But good on the NLRB today. A positive decision in my view. Good stuff there. A couple of quick things. Over the weekend, did you see? I know there was all the horrible shootings and all of that insanity. And the hope is that we begin to heal as a nation and really deal with the problems that come out of that. But I was looking at Spain, and it was the running of the bulls. And I'm always amazed that you get people who are dumb enough to go out there and run near the bulls. But I understand 6 people were gored, and I believe it was 2 died. One was a bullfighter, and one was one of the runners. And, I was looking at the pictures going, why? Why would you do this? And then I started thinking about it. Education spending. Those little horn things, I'm sure that they hurt. Would you do it? I don't think I would. Anyway, if you've missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go for the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as you can always, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. I'd be interested in your thoughts on our education spending. Should we be spending more on for-profit private prisons? Is that a good thing? Or should we be investing in education and infrastructure and all of that other stuff? I'd love to hear your thoughts, questions, and the comments on that. Looking forward to next week's big RNC convention. Should be a lot of fun. Love to also hear your thoughts on that. Any questions you may have. Thanks for being here. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email Rick at thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Its color like the tidal flood beneath the lunar sway, imperial, mysterious, in amorous array.